Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is a Grudge Not Held in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 6, Treachery. The two top officers of the 4th looked on in horror at the 46 corpses which had once been the ruling body of Seoul society. How could this happen? Isane asked hoarsely. I believe we'll find the answer this way, Anohana replied resolutely as she walked out of the chamber and through another corridor. Belatedly, Isane rushed to keep up with her captain. The lieutenant realized that they were entering the area known as the Purewood Towers. It was the residence of the Central 46, and on pain of death, no one aside from them was allowed to enter. Instinctually, Isane thought about pointing this out to her captain, but considering the macabre scene which they had just discovered, perhaps such an indiscretion would be pardoned in this instance. They entered the forest of towers, and Isane immediately saw a figure emerging from the nearest one. She gasped upon recognizing him. Hello, Aizen Taeko, Anohana greeted gravely, seemingly unsurprised at his not-quite-dead status. But I believe that Taeko is no longer appropriate, is it, perpetrator of high treason, Aizen Sosuke? How do you do, Anohana Taeko? Aizen replied warmly, but Isane could detect no true affability in that tone anymore. I was thinking if you were going to come, it would be soon. Did you know I was here right away? If you went through all the trouble of creating a fake corpse of yourself, then there would be no better place to hide than in these chambers, where entry is forbidden, Anohana answered. Close, the newfound traitor admitted, but you made two mistakes. The first is your assumption that I came here to hide myself. And the other. Suddenly, Aizen was holding the dead body they had found pinned high to the wall a couple of days prior. This isn't a corpse figure. Both women looked on in surprise. When did he? Isane asked. When did I get this? Aizen finished her question. I've been holding this the whole time. Only until this very moment, I just hadn't decided to show you that. What followed was a full explanation regarding the effects of Kyoka Suijutsu's complete hypnosis, after which he brought out a long strip of cloth. With a whip of his wrist, the ribbon extended to surround him. Anohana immediately recognized it as a teleportation device. Lastly, let me compliment you, Aizen spoke as the teleportation spell began its work. Although you touched it the longest for your examination, you were superb to sense even a slight incongruity about my corpse while under complete hypnosis, Anohana Taeko. Farewell, I doubt we shall meet again. Isane was not about to let the traitor leave without a fight, and even if she was a healer with limited combat experience, her anger ruled that she attack. She charged forward and drew her Zanpakuto, but it was too late, the spell had already allowed Aizen to escape. Isane cursed as she realized that the criminal had gotten away. It could not be helped, Anohana assured her. Find out where he went. The lieutenant immediately got to work and tracked down the coordinates of Aizen's teleportation destination with a Kakushitsujaku spell. It's Sokioka Hill, she announced. Very well, Anohana acknowledged. Send a message to all captains and lieutenants informing them of the situation. After you have done so, we will go to Sokioka Hill and treat whatever wounded may be there. The chief healer paused for a moment, as if she were considering something. Then she instructed, and also, send that same message to the Ryoka as well. Kojiro had the point of his sword aimed at Aburai's heart, and was about to commit the rather unsavory act of ending the man's life when he felt a burst of captain-level Ryotsu appear on his spiritual radar. A moment later, the head of the 9th Division materialized right next to Kukaki Rukia, noticeably without his haori, and with bandages over his upper right torso. Taeko, Kojiro said in surprise. The 9th did not have patrols anywhere near this area, so why was their captain here? Without a word to the lieutenant, the blind captain took out a white ribbon Kojiro immediately recognized as a teleportation spell. Before he could react, Taisen had taken himself and Rukia away, the latter still bound by the Rakuya Koro spell. Kojiro regained his composure and frowned. It seemed that Taisen's sense of justice declared that the Kukaki girl should not die. He wondered how many others the Godi I-13 would lose due to the Central 46's decision to execute this child. He was not unsympathetic to the rescuer's cause, but his own path lay with his captain. He wanted to alert Yamamoto of the occurrence, but he felt that the old man's sword was already released, and that meant he was now in combat. It would not be a good idea to distract him. So instead, Kojiro first cast a Rekyukoro spell to bind Abarai in place. It would have been easier to just kill the man, as he intended to only moments before, but he never liked killing, even when it was necessary. Besides, there was something bothering him. If Tison had truly come to save Kukaki Rukia, then why did he just take her and leave her friends behind? His pride in justice should have guided him into battling Kojiro to rescue all of the defectors. And from the look on Abarai's face, it appeared that Tison's actions were as much of a surprise to him as well. Until the old lieutenant had the answer, he would keep Abarai alive. After he had confirmed that his adversary was restrained, Kojiro cast a Kakushitsujaku to track where the renegade captain had gone. Surprise once again took him as he recognized the coordinates of Tison's destination. If the captain had arrived to help Rukia escape, Kojiro would have expected them to head west, the general direction she and her rescuers had apparently been going. Perhaps even north or south, to throw off pursuers. Instead, he found that Tison's location was Sokioka Hill. Why would he go there, if his intention was to rescue the condemned girl? Unless saving Kukaki Rukia was not his goal. The golden-eyed veteran came to the conclusion that there certainly had to be a third party involved with this conflict. Tison obviously did not take Kukaki Rukia on the authority of the Godai 13, but it was now apparent that he was not there to save her, either. This unknown third party would also explain Aizen's death. Kojiro was as puzzled as anyone else by the identity of the captain's killer. He knew that none of the Ryoka had the power to kill Aizen, and even if they did, none of the reports he had heard indicated that they would be vicious enough to nail him to a wall on his own sword. After all, there had been no fatalities at the hands of the Ryoka as of yet. The closest case was Kuratsuke Mayuri, who had been forced to retreat from his attacker in a liquid state. It was for that reason that the old lieutenant suspected that the Quincy, the same one who almost killed Kuratsuke, might have been the culprit. He knew firsthand how vicious the spiritual archers could be in a fight, especially if they were out for revenge. Impaling an enemy to a wall would not be out of character for them. But if this third party was responsible, then that meant that the Ryoka were innocent of murdering a captain. That was why when he received Aizen's message only a minute later, he was not surprised to learn that another party had indeed been responsible for recent events. However, he was as surprised as anyone else as to learn the identity of that third party. From the way Renji appeared to be listening, it looked like Aizen's message had reached him as well. Good, that meant one less person to inform. He turned to the two other Shinigami still trapped in his binding spells. With a wave of his hand, he dispelled the effects, and all three of them were freed. Abarai-san, Kojiro called. Since there is no need for us to fight anymore, I suggest that you let Hanataro tend to your wounds. I will also let you explain the situation to your compatriots. You're letting us go that easily. Abarai rasped as he sealed his Zanpakuto and eased down to the ground. The healer was at his side a second later with Kido spells active. Carrying out fraudulent orders is illegal, Abarai-san, the lieutenant of the 1st Division chided mildly, and sent a small smirk in his direction. If you had told us that earlier, we could have avoided this whole bloody mess. Abarai scoffed in humor at the remark, only to regret it as he coughed up another load of blood. Satisfied that his work here was done, the oldest lieutenant in the Godai 13 flash-stepped at top speed towards the geographic center of the Siratii, where he knew two traders to be found. Hinamari's patrol slowly made their way through the streets of the Siratii, and they gradually were able to breathe easier as they walked or were dragged away from ground zero of Yamamoto's Shikai. Their flight was finally stopped as the lieutenant inspected the condition of her troops and saw that they were now all able to breathe comfortably. "Is everyone all right?" she asked. A round of affirmatives, some more out of breath than others, answered her. "Good," she continued. "We'll have to find another way around." "And what happened to Naneo-san?" The 5th Division patrol looked around and saw that they were the only ones in the area. "They must have gone the other way to escape Yamamoto's riot, so," the 4th seat suggested. "Probably," Hinamori agreed. "But what was she doing?" The lieutenant stopped when she felt the effects of a Tentakara spell making contact, and the other officers looked at her inquisitively. She held up a hand to stay any questions they might have, in order to hear the message clearly. To the Godai 13, all captains, lieutenants, and Ryoko lady and gentlemen, this is Katetsu Isane Fukotaiko of the 4th Division. This is an urgent message from Anohana Taiko and myself. Everything I'm about to tell you is absolutely true. The joy at hearing that her beloved captain was alive quickly turned to horror and disbelief as she heard how he had murdered the Central 46 and faked orders for Kukaki Rukia's execution. There was no way her captain Aizen would do such a thing, was there? It had to be a mistake, some kind of misunderstanding. There was only one way to make sure. 4th seat, Hinamori said softly, as she came to a decision. You are in charge now. Hinamori Fukotaiko, he said in surprise. I don't have time to explain it all now, the lieutenant continued. But get everyone back to the barracks, and wait there. What about you? The 6th seat asked. There's something I need to find out. Without another word, Hinamori flash-stepped as fast as she could to Sokioku Hill, even risking going through the storm of the Captain Commander's riot so she had just struggled out of. She did not see the need to tell them of Aizen's alleged betrayal, not until she had seen the truth for herself. And that was exactly what she intended to do. Nanao froze as she listened to Isane's message, and a look at her compatriots confirmed that they, too, had heard the news. Nei-san, Kian said softly. I'm going to Sokioku Hill, Nanao told the group, her tone not allowing any argument. Kian, Sentaro, look after the Ryoka. Without waiting for confirmation, she disappeared in a buzz of shunpo. Still unable to move her body because of Seisaku's spell, Rukia's eyes darted around in confusion as the long cloth gradually retracted, to find that she had arrived at the very place her friends were working so hard to keep her away from, the Sokioku. Welcome, Kukaki Rukia. She was not well acquainted with the man, but Rukia still recognized Aizen's voice, even though she had thought he was dead. That will no longer be necessary, Aizen said with feigned kindness as he dispelled the Rakuryukoro from around her. Rukia stammered wordlessly for a few moments as the traitor walked up to her. And suddenly, she was in someone's arms, and several meters away from her previous location. Sheesh, remind me to yell at Renji next time I see him. Rukia gasped and looked up. Ichigo. Hey, the substitute replied, and nodded to the 5th sex captain. That Aizen. The petite girl nodded. Ichigo set Rukia down on her feet, and told her, stay here. I'll fight him. Are you insane? She shrieked. Look at you. Your fight with Ni-Isama has left you barely standing. How do you expect to beat 2 captains by yourself? Don't make such a fuss, Ichigo snapped back. You may be right, and I won't win, but at least I'll buy time for people on our side to get here. With that declaration, Ichigo raised his black blade and charged forward. Jin and Hitsugaya paused in their duel as they heard Katetsu Isane's message. What do ya think o' that, Hitsugaya Taiko? Jin asked. Sounds like we're more needed up on the hill. Agreed, the other captain replied as he reset his Zanpakuto and returned him to his sheath. Together, the two flash-stepped to the top of the hill within a couple of minutes, where they saw one very alive Aizen holding a terrified Rukia by her arm. Just a few feet away lay Kurosaki Ichigo, evidently defeated but still conscious. He looked at the new arrivals with relief on his face. Yatter, Aizen, Jin remarked as he took in the scene. So, this is the face you've been hiding from us all these years. Ichimaru Taiko, Hitsugaya Taiko, Aizen greeted them calmly. Welcome. So, Aizen, the Silver Fox said casually. Why do ya want to kill Rukia-chan? Her death is necessary in order to attain my goals, the recently revealed mastermind answered. Well, I think ya should let her go right now. Ya see, I'm a lil fond of Rukia-chan, and I don't want her to die. Let me ask you this, Ichimaru Jin, Aizen said, handing off his grip on Rukia's arm to Daisen. Who would you rather save, Kukaki Rukia, or your wife Rangiku? Now you're getting nasty, Jin remarked. Are ya making a threat? The opposite, in fact, Aizen countered smoothly. I am merely pointing out that Kukaki Rukia's fate is certain, your wife's is not. Yeah, sure, that ain't a threat. I am not deliberately setting out to kill her, Ichimaru Jin, but since I intend to make war against the Godai 13, I'm sure you can understand that there is death in war. I am making you an offer, your personality and skills are unique and quite interesting, and I am sure I could make great use of them. I should warn you, that the days of Soul Society are numbered. I am giving you and your wife the opportunity to follow me and ultimately survive. Ya really know how to sell a guy, Aizen, the fox commented. But what makes ya so sure that you're gonna win? Ya got 11 captains against ya, and all ya have on your side is Tyson over there. The former 9th Division captain bristled at the implied insult, but restrained himself from attacking without permission from Aizen. The key to my power is within Kukaki Rukia, Aizen explained. Stored inside her soul is an object called the Hogyaka that erases the divide between Shinigami and Hollow, creating in the process a hybrid more powerful than either. That is my ultimate goal, to break past the limits of a Shinigami, and ascend to heights beyond which have ever been attained before. It really does that? Jin asked, sounding skeptical but not rejecting the idea. Urahara Kisuk was the one who made it, Aizen informed him. It works. Huh, the snake replied, and gave the offer a good thinking over for a moment before he answered, okay, I'm in. Both Rukia, restrained by Tyson, and Ichigo, from his wounded position on the ground, gasped in horror. Jews, let me find Rangiku and bring her here, he said. Before he could start to pivot, though, a large anthropomorphic canine rose up from behind Aizen with his sword raised and his lupin mouth forming a snarl of fury. Upon recognizing the gauntlets and Haori of the unusual being, Jin realized with a start that this was actually Captain Komamura, unmasked at last. He only allowed himself a moment to be surprised by this revelation before he focused on the matter at hand. Aizen. Calmly, the lead traitor caught the large captain's sword with his bare hand. Komamura's follow-up punch forced Aizen to leap away to a safer position next to his subordinate. Before he attacked again, Komamura turned to his old friend and demanded, Tyson, if you have an excuse, tell me now. The blind former captain's silence was his only response. You don't? Nothing, asked Komamura, and then growled, that's too bad, Tyson. An explosion of riot signaled Captain's release of Bankai. Before he could make use of it, however, Aizen suddenly appeared in front of him. Komamura gasped in surprise, and looked in time to see the image of his enemy next to Tyson disappear. The illusionist used this distraction to begin his attack. Hado number 90. He was forced to cut off his incantation and whip his head backward to avoid being impaled on a suddenly extending sword. But he did not dodge it completely. While his skin remained unscratched, his glasses were not so fortunate. The frames were sliced through, and the pieces fell off his face and fell to the ground, the lenses cracking upon impact. Komamura took the opportunity to bring down the gargantuan blade of his Bankai down on the traitor. Aizen leapt out of the way of the massive sword, and reached for his own Zanpakuto, only to snatch his hand back away at the last second before a lightning-fast blade could sever it from his arm. The former captain turned his head and looked with a straight, serious face at the culprit. Aizen, about what I said, the fox grinned from ear to ear. Jews kiddin'. Rangiku had just reseled her sword after defeating Kira, and had just sheathed it when Aizen's message made contact with them both. She gasped at hearing the news of Aizen's betrayal and murder of the Central 46, and the fact that all orders concerning Kukaki Rukia were falsified. From the horrified expression on Kira's face, she guessed that he also received the message. Rangiku-san, I'm so sorry, he said from the ground. It's all right. She knelt down and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder briefly. Just stay there and rest, I'll head to Sokioku Hill. Good luck, he called to her as she left. Once again, Rangiku set off to save Rukia's life. And this time, the rest of Godei 13 would also be there to do the same. Ichigo's hopes rose when he saw how Ichimaru's strike was quick enough to prevent Aizen from drawing upon his deadliest asset. After his first attack, Ichimaru immediately followed up with a thrust forward from Shinso, and the seemingly limitless blade sped towards her target. Danku. The shield of Kido magic cracked but held its ground, and succeeded in stopping Ichimaru's Zanpakuto in her tracks. At that same moment, Komamura brought his enormous Bankai down on Aizen's head. But it was too late, Aizen had drawn his sword. Stopping the gargantuan blade with his own, Aizen then finished the spell he had attempted to use earlier. Hado number 90, Kuro Hitsuji. This time, Ichimaru was unable to prevent the man from the spell from completing, and Komamura was enveloped in a deadly box devoid of light. A moment later, he came into visibility again, and collapsed from the number of lacerations covering his body. Ichimaru obviously realized that it was time to play hardball, and pointed his Wakaizushi at his opponent again. Then he uttered, "Bankai." Before he could strike, the fox jerked forward and lost his balance, and it suddenly registered to him that he was bleeding profusely from a deep diagonal slash wound on his back. The illusion shattered to reveal Aizen standing behind him, Ichimaru's blood dripping from the blade. "I must admit, that was the first time someone managed to prevent me from drawing Kyoka Suijutsu," Aizen complimented as his latest opponent fell to the ground unconscious. "I do wish you had chosen the wiser course and joined me. You would have been a most interesting subordinate." He whipped his sword once, flicking the crimson liquid off her before returning Kyoka Suijutsu to her sheath. "And now, where was I? Oh, yes, I was in the middle of explaining to you. Heido number 4, Byakurai." The electrical bolt of Kido hit Aizen in the back, but did nothing more than singe his coat. He calmly turned to see a brunette woman wearing glasses, 2 fingers pointing in his direction, and now looking at him with a pale, terrified expression as she saw how ineffective her attack was. At that moment, Hitsugaya flash-stepped in front of the newly arrived Nanao. In the debacle with Ichimaru and the subsequent short-lived fight involving the fox and the hound and the illusionist, Ichigo had almost forgotten about the quiet young man. "Hitsugaya Teiko," the woman cried in surprise. Before she could react, the white-haired captain had already drawn his Zanpakuto and let loose an ice dragon from the tip, obviously activating his Shikai on a mental command. The dragon encircled the shocked woman with its body, pinning her arms to her sides and trapping her within its frozen coils. "What are you doing?" Ichigo yelled at Hitsugaya. "Didn't you hear the message? Aizen's your enemy." "No, he is not," Kurosaki Ichigo, the mastermind corrected. The shock on Rukia and Ichigo's faces was even greater than the one they had worn when Ichimaru agreed to join Aizen. "What?" the substitute Shinigami asked. "Ichimaru Teiko was understandably mistaken when he said that there were 11 captains against me," the smug sophisticate explained. "But there are only 10, both Kaname and Toshiro work for me." With that said, he turned his gaze back to his captive. "Kukaki Rukia, when you were sighted again in the world of the living, the first thing I did was kill the Central 46. Ranjika lost her footing and almost fell when she suddenly felt something like a punch to her gut. She could feel her husband's Ryutsu ahead, and she could feel how it had suddenly dropped to a dangerously low and potentially fatal level. "No, Jin," she whispered, and urged herself to move faster. "Don't you dare die on me." "It was because I judged that a possibility had arisen that the execution would fail due to your efforts," Aizen continued his monologue. "There are only 2 ways to remove a foreign object directly embedded inside a soul, either by evaporating the soul acting as the outside shell with an ultra-high temperature destructive force like the Sokyoku, or by somehow going directly into the soul structure and forcibly detaching it. If, by some chance, the Sokyoku execution were to fail, I would have to find the other way." As he continued this monologue, the deceiver reached into his Shiakusho and removed a small, thin cylindrical object. "What I needed to do that was information kept in the underground assembly hall's great corridor of spirit documents. One piece at a time, I investigated every scrap of Urahara Kisuk's past research. Embedding of a foreign object in a soul was a technology he developed after all. I surmised, therefore, that the technology to remove it must also be hiding there." He seemed to switch something on, and the object released a cloud of ash into the air. 6 large spikes erupted from the ground in a circle surrounding Aizen and Rukia, and the former's hand turned a plant-like green. "And this is the answer." Aizen suddenly drove his gloved hand directly into Rukia's chest. As Ichigo looked on helplessly, it seemed like a fist had been shoved into his own heart as well. All his training with Urahara, his fight with Ikeku, his clash with Renji, his battle with Kenpei, his duel with Byakuya, and he could do nothing but watch the one he had sworn to protect be killed right in front of him. After a moment that seemed more like an eternity, Aizen removed something from Rukia's body and dropped her to the ground, a gaping hole reminiscent of a hollows where he had punctured her. Ichigo almost leapt for joy when he saw the hole close up, and Aizen noted that Rukia had been unharmed in the retrieval of the Hogyaku. But unfortunately, I no longer have use for you, the sociopathic sadist said, and once again picked up Rukia by the front of her kimono, and dread rushed into Ichigo's heart. Kill her, Toshiro. Very well, Hitsugaya said as turned towards his master and pointed the tip of his sword in the direction of the helpless girl. At an unspoken command, another icy dragon emerged from the blade's tip and flew towards his prey. Ichigo tried to get up, but his body refused his commands, and for the second time in less than a minute, the substitute Shinigami was forced to watch as someone killed Rukia. But instead of a small girl, the frozen serpentine creature impacted itself on the body of Kukaki Byakuya. "Nii-sama," Rukia said in quiet shock. The ice shattered, and Byakuya sank to his knees, held up only by the petite form of the sister he had just shielded. "Nii-sama. Why did you save me?" Aizen calmly took a few steps forward and reached for his sword. Ichigo realized with a panic that the man intended to finish the job himself. Before he could, the traitor was interrupted by the arrival of Jidanbo and Shiba Kyukaku. The latter's Reikoho spell forced Aizen to relocate, but before he could retaliate, two forms flash-stepped in front of him, one keeping Kyoka Suijutsu in her sheath, the other holding a blade to his neck. "Well, isn't this a nostalgic face?" Aizen remarked calmly. "Don't move," Yuriuki ordered. "If you so much as twitch one muscle, I'll lop your head off." So iPhone finished, her Wakaizushi only a millimeter away from carrying out her threat. "I see," Aizen conceded. As Yuriuki and Kyukaku bantered, Toshiro stood by and calmly witnessed his master's seeming checkmate. "I guess I better go help," he grumbled, but was stopped by a sword at his own throat. "Don't move," hissed the furious, feminine, and all too familiar voice from behind him. Toshiro turned his head enough for his captor to enter his line of vision. After his eyes met with Hinamari's, he sighed and faced forward again. "Apologies, Aizen Teiko," he said. "I've been captured." As events continued around him with the other officers of the Godai 13 arriving on the plateau, Hinamori whispered angrily in his ear, "Why did you do it, Toshiro?" "I didn't believe Isane-san at first, but I heard Aizen Teiko admit to killing the Central 46. I saw Aizen Teiko order you to kill Rukia-san. I saw you try to kill Rukia-san. Why did you betray us?" Hitsugaya turned his head again and looked at her, and he could see the hidden question in his old friend's eyes. "Why did you betray me?" If the cold former captain had any reply, she never heard it. At that moment, a burst of light came from the sky and surrounded Aizen, liberating him from Yuriuki and So iPhone. Hinamori looked up along with everyone else to see Jillian's emerge from a crack in the sky, and two more pillars of light came down. One freed Taisen from Hisagi, while the other separated her from Toshiro. "It looks like this is goodbye," Toshiro said, his voice tainted with sadness, and slowly turned to face her completely. "Momo. I'm sorry." Hinamori could do nothing but stare into his eyes, searching for something, anything. Through the glow of the negation, she saw so much pain in there. As the ground broke and began to lift him into the sky, she continued to hold his gaze, and saw how much he wanted to break free of the beam and come back to her. But for reasons that Hinamori could not fathom, he did not. She ignored the conversations occurring with the other two departing captains, her eyes were only on Toshiro's retreating figure. When the three were safe in the hands of the Minos Grande, and the sky closed up to its natural state again, she broke down and cried. Rangiku got to the hill just in time to see Aizen and his fellow traders disappear into the Garganta. But her attention was diverted to the fallen form of her husband. Jin. She rushed to his side, checking for any response, and desperately hoping that he still breathed. It seemed to her that she had only gotten there when medics from the 4th gently pushed her aside and began their work to save the captain. "Is he going to be all right?" Rangiku asked the healers. "We'll do our best," one of them answered. "And please, stay back and don't distract us." Forcing herself to restrain a more emotional outburst, she nodded and complied. Looking at the bloody figure of her husband on the ground, Rangiku suddenly realized how much the thought of Jin dying scared her. Despite their decades of marriage, she had never truly worried about her husband's life. He had always seemed untouchable, the way he fought his enemies. Even the stronger ones he encountered he seemed to dispose of with ease, relying on his wits as much as his strength. Like the foxes of legends, it always seemed like Jin could outthink any opponent. For the first time, her worst nightmare of Jin dying threatened to come to life, and in her terror, Ranjika cried. Chapter 7, Aftermath. How do you feel, Hinamari-kun? It still hurts. Anohana settled back in her seat to regard the diminutive lieutenant closely. That's understandable. I know that you admired Aizen, so I imagine that you have some mixed feelings about the situation. On the day following the departure of the three renegade captains, Anohana had begun interviewing the people closest to the traitors, to ensure that they were still mentally able to perform their duties. Out of her patients, the one she had worried about the most was Hinamori. Not only was her beloved captain in reality a sociopathic villain, the girl was hit doubly by the fact that her oldest friend was also one of the traitors. Externally, she was handling it fine, but the ancient medic knew that Hinamari's inner thoughts would still be a tempest of confusion and turmoil. It's strange, but after the first pain of realizing the truth, it didn't really hurt, Hinamori said. Right now, it's Toshiro leaving me that I'm more upset about. You were close to them both. Why does Hichugaya's betrayal hurt more than Aizen's? I'm not quite sure, she answered, but paused as if to gather her thoughts. Anohana waited patiently, sensing that the girl was trying to figure it out for herself. When I first heard Aizen-san's message, I didn't believe it. I couldn't accept that my Aizen Teiko would do such a thing. But I had to make sure. I got to the hill as fast as I could, and I got there just as Aizen Teiko was talking about how he killed the Central 46, and how he was going to kill Rukia-san, and I saw him put his fist in her chest. Her rant became faster-paced and her breathing more ragged. She was still alive, but Aizen Teiko didn't even look like he cared. He wasn't glad that she didn't need to die. He ordered Toshiro to kill her. And he obeyed him. Why would he do that? Hinamari-kun, please calm yourself, Anohana interjected. Take some deep breaths and then continue. The girl obeyed, taking a few moments to settle down with steady regulated respirations. It's my fault, she finally said. I should have done something to stop Aizen Teiko before he tried to kill Rukia-san, but I just couldn't move, I couldn't believe the words that were coming from his mouth, I couldn't think, and I couldn't move. It wouldn't have mattered, Anohana assured her. Aizen had already defeated 3 captain-class fighters by the time you had arrived. Any attempt on your part would have resulted in similar injuries to you, if not death. Still, I should have done something. Hinamari-kun, in that instance, you were right in keeping your distance, Anohana said firmly. The lieutenant did not seem to accept the healer's words, but did not argue the point anymore. The worst part was hearing him speak. Hinamori resumed her thoughts softly. Aizen Teiko's voice always sounded so soothing. Even when I saw him fight hollows and give orders, his tone was firm, but always gentle. When I heard him speak on that hill, he sounded nothing like the man I knew. Aizen Teiko was warm and understanding, that creature I heard on the hill was cold and cruel. It was as if someone had taken my captain out of his body and replaced him with a monster. It was when I heard him talk that I realized that the Aizen Teiko I knew was dead. She stopped for a moment, feeling more sobs coming onto her. Noting this, her counselor leaned forward to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You can let it all out in here, Hinamari-kun, Anohana said gently. This permission was all it took. Her patient spent the next few minutes letting the tears flow, before regaining her composure. Anohana poured a cup of water for her, and let the girl rehydrate herself before speaking again. The only thing that's stopping me from going completely insane is Toshiro, Hinamori resumed. Because when I saw and heard Aizen Teiko, he had changed into a completely different person. But when I saw Toshiro, he was exactly the same as always. He acted so cold towards others, but when he looked at me. She sighed and took a breath before continuing. When I held my sword at his neck, he turned around and looked at me. I saw the same Toshiro that I had always known since we were kids. When I watched him go away in the negation, I saw in his eyes how much he hated to leave me. I don't know why he thought he had to go, but he did. A shuddering breath interrupted her ramblings before she blurted out, "It's my fault. You are not to blame for Hichugaya's actions, Hinamari-kun. I convinced him to join the 5th Division. I loved it there and I loved Aizen Teiko, and I wanted Toshiro to be there, too. He finally gave in to my begging and joined and became lieutenant. Aizen Taiko must have lied to him or manipulated him or something into thinking he was doing the right thing by leaving. If I hadn't been so clingy to him, he would have joined another division and he wouldn't have joined Aizen Taiko. As was proven with Taisen, Anohana pointed out, separation by division would not have prevented Hitsugaya from joining Aizen. You are not to blame for his betrayal. The first part of her statement was not completely true. While Taisen had been with the 9th for well over 100 years, his first division out of the academy had been the 5th. But Anohana decided that Hinamori did not need to know that at this time. Right now, the girl was not thinking clearly, and would look for any excuse to blame herself, no matter how illogical. Hinamori was quiet for a moment, and then spoke with a firmness that almost took the captain by surprise. I'm going to save him. What do you mean? Toshiro. I know that there's hope for him. The next time we meet, I will make him understand that he doesn't need to fight for Aizen. I will make him understand that he can come back. Anohana knew it would be pointless to contradict the young girl on this. She had heard a similar oath from Hisagi and Komamura concerning Taisen, so Hinamori's words were not unexpected. What did worry the healer was the fact that the girl may not accept that she would most likely be forced to take lethal action against her friend, or, considering the power difference between the two, he might just kill her. And even if Hitsugaya chose to return, he most likely would be imprisoned for treason, if not executed. But that discussion could wait for another time. Hinamori-kun, I think that's enough for today, she finally said. I believe that you should take a full week's rest. But, what about the 5th? Your third seat can handle the duties for 1 week. It is more important that you have some time to relax, clear your head, and most importantly, spend time with your friends. Next week at the same time, we will talk again. Hinamori looked like she wanted to argue, but wisely decided against it. All right, Anohana Taiko, she finally agreed, and got up to leave. One more thing, Hinamori-kun, said Anohana. Be mindful of how you add suffixes to Aizen's name now, he is no longer a captain. Hinamori froze. She had not even realized that she had still been keeping the honorific to Aizen's name. Of course, Anohana Taiko, she replied, and rushed out of the room before the lady could stop her again. Fireworks exploded from the west on the evening of December 20th. The 3 intended witnesses of these illuminations were on the rooftops of the 5th Division's training grounds. Captain Aizen was sitting comfortably on the roof, his legs stretched out in front of him. Directly to his right was his Lieutenant Hitsugaya. Unlike the captain, he still seemed to sit stiffly with his knees up, as if he did not know how to relax on his birthday. Third in the line was third seed Hinamori, the only one of the 3 who had to have a blanket wrapped around her to keep warm. Hinamori glanced shyly at the 2 men next to her. Captain Aizen was her hero, and Toshiro was her best friend. She knew that people who joined from the Rokanga were not always able to stay with their friends, and so grew more distant over time. She was glad that had not happened with her and Toshiro. The fireworks display reached their finale, and the white-haired lieutenant finally spoke, "Thank you, Aizen." The captain smiled warmly in return. It had bothered Hinamori at first that her friend never added honorifics to his superior's name, but Aizen never seemed to mind. After a moment, Toshiro then said in a quieter voice, "Thank you, Hinamori." His childhood companion beamed back at him. Now, she barely even noticed the lack of suffixes which might be misconstrued as disrespect. After all, the 3 of them were good as family. Rangiku stood by her husband's bed, simply looking at his unconscious form. Even though the healers told her that Jin would make a full recovery in no time at all, she still did not like the sight of him on a cot in the 4th. She reached forward and gently held his hand. At least it was warm, a sign that he was not close to death. Honestly, Rangiku didn't know what she would do without Jin. He had been part of her life for as long as her memory was worth recalling. He had been the one to save her from starvation in the Rokanga, and continued to look after her until they both joined the Shino Academy. After they officially became Shinigami, things changed, but not in a bad way. Jin stopped being her caretaker. Instead, he became her teacher, and gave her lessons on survival. Those lessons were neither gentle nor kind, but in the long run, Ranjika was grateful he had taught them to her. He always been her friend, and then so much more to her. He was now her husband, the center of her world, and she did not know what she would do if he were removed from her life. No, she did know, she would survive. She knew that Jin had been training her and preparing her for the possibility that he might die before her. If such a thing ever occurred, Ranjika would live on as best as she knew how, just like Jin would want her to. Ranjika-san. The lieutenant turned around and saw Isane standing in the doorway, a look of concern and sympathy in her eyes. I'm here to check on your husband's condition, the healer explained gently. Ranjika nodded, and moved aside so the tall medic could do her job. It's weird seeing him like this, the lieutenant of the 3rd admitted to her peer. Despite all the fighting Jin's been through, I've never seen him emerge from a battle with anything more than a few bruises and scratches. This is the first time I've really worried that he might get killed in a fight. Isane sent her friend a sympathetic look. It's always scary after the first brush with death. Once we get into the upper-seated ranks, we get confident of our power, and we start to feel as if we are invincible. I always knew the risk was there, Ranjika said. But it was never really reality for you, was it? No, the strawberry blonde woman admitted softly. Anyway, it looks like Ichimaru Teiko is recovering well. Isane changed the subject with the hope of brightening the other woman's mood, and she started a session of Kaido by placing her hands over the captain's back and letting the green glow do its work. His wounds are healing quickly, and... A line appeared between her eyebrows as she frowned in confusion. That's strange, she noted. It feels like he's already awake. A weak chuckle reached their ears. Guess I've been found out, Jin murmured as a familiar smile returned to his face. Jin! Ranjika exclaimed excitedly, happy at seeing her husband conscious. But any relief she felt was overshadowed by annoyance. How long have you been awake? When Ya started holding my hand, he answered. I thought it was so nice to have a beautiful woman holding my hand that I didn't want to ruin the moment. Ranjika narrowed her eyes at him and growled, flattery won't help you here, Buster. As soon as you're out of the 4th, I am going to punch you right back in for worrying me like that. But I feel so weak, Jin lamented. I don't think I'll be able to leave for a while. From the looks of things, you should be cleared to go later today, Isane informed him. Tomorrow at the latest, though I do recommend you take it easy for a while. You're not helping, he complained as he noticed the violent look in his wife's eyes, and then not so subtly changed the subject. So what happened? Did we win? Not really, Ranjika chose to humor him for the time being, and proceeded to inform him of the events on Sokioka Hill after he had been defeated. So Hitsugaya was working for Aizen? Jin asked. Thought so. You mean you knew? Ranjika asked in surprise. I started suspecting when he didn't say nothing while I was chatting with Aizen, and I didn't know for sure till Komamura showed up, he admitted. He wasn't helping out when Komamura and I were fighting, so I figured he was probably working for the other side. Makes sense, though, since Hitsugaya used to be Aizen's lieutenant, before he became captain. We're lucky no one died, Isane said. You were among the most critically injured, Ichimaru Teiko. It ain't lucky for me. Considering you're in the 4th division instead of the next life, I consider that better odds than getting a smile out of Kukaki Teiko, Ranjika corrected him. I suppose so, Jin conceded. Kira-kun, how are you feeling? Anohana asked. As well as anyone would feel after having their captain abandon them, he responded dryly. Do you blame yourself for what happened? Some, he admitted. I feel like I should have figured it out sooner, that Hitsugaya was working against Soul Society. Did you ever have any suspicion that he was a traitor? No, Kira sighed. Hitsugaya was always cold, but he was an efficient captain. He was not close to any of us, except for Hinamari-kun, but he still treated us right. I don't know if it's accurate to say that we actually liked him, but he was definitely well respected in our division. Now, I can't help but wonder how much of it was an act, how much of his behavior was really because he was genuinely looking out for us, and how much was because he needed to keep up his appearance of being a good captain. And now what? Kira exhaled slowly, organizing his thoughts. What else am I supposed to do? I must continue my duties as a lieutenant. With Hitsugaya gone, the 10th needs me now more than ever. After at least 3 days off. Anohana Teiko. You need a few days off to relieve some of the mental stress caused by departure of your captain. I have already told the same to Hinamari-kun. Kira sighed, but gave a nod to show his obedience. That will be all for now, Anohana instructed. Come back 3 days from now, before you return to your duties. Yes, ma'am. True to Isane's word, Jin had been cleared to leave later that afternoon, not long before sundown, with instructions to take it easy and not participate in strenuous activity. Now he and Rangiku were on their way to the exit. It's nice to be out of the 4th, the smiling captain said. No offense to Anohana Teiko, but it's boring to be laying in a bed all day. You should have thought of that before you almost got yourself killed, Rangiku scolded. Which reminds me. Wham! Jin's head rocked back, but his face emerged unscathed. Even though he was still recovering his Ryatsu, he still had enough to shield himself from his wife's fist. Aya, Rangiku, he said playfully. Yeah, didn't need to do dash. His wife was one of the few people who could succeed in surprising Jin, which was one of the reasons why he loved her. And she was giving a very nice surprise by grabbing the front of his shiakusho and pulling him into a fierce kiss. After she had pulled away with a gasp, the fox sported a very happy grin on his face. Maybe I should get almost killed more often, he said thoughtfully, and then snapped his fingers as an idea occurred to him. I know. I'll take a trip to Hueco Mundo, and then I'll get Aizen to cut me down again. Oh, no you don't. Rangiku countered as she gripped his hand and dragged him along. You are coming with me back to our room. Well, if you'd insist, he grinned with feigned resignation. It looked like he was going to have to ignore that bit about avoiding strenuous activity. Rangiku entered the 10th division late in the afternoon, noting that she no longer got the chills just by walking into area. She had been up most of the night with Jin eagerly and willfully disobeying the avoid strenuous activity directive, and so she had slept late. Now that she was awake, it was her intention to visit her friends from the 5th, 9th, and 10th and help them cope with the recent betrayal. Despite her dislike of Hitsugaya, she still considered Kira to be a good friend, back when he had been a member of the 3rd. It had been said to see him go and take the position of lieutenant in the 10th, but she was always glad to see him in the vice-captain meetings. In some ways, Kira remained an honorary member of the 3rd, even if he was now the acting captain of that division. With his captain gone and the 10th's morale broken, Rangiku decided that Kira needed something to forget his troubles for a couple of days. Kira had long lost count of the amount of sake he had imbibed, only knowing that it could be described as a lot. All thanks to one Ichimaru Rangiku. He had been depressed after the departure of Hitsugaya, and after his psychological interview with Anohana, he eagerly took the healer's advice to relax. It was while he was settling down in his barracks the day after his interview with Anohana when Bubbly Blonde found him and suggested they share a drink. Kira agreed to 1 saucer, but then 1 turned into 2, 2 became 4, and somewhere along the way, those numbers began to jumble up. Also somewhere after his 4th jug of sake, Hisagi had joined in on their commiseration. He drank to forget, for the moment, about how he had admired his captain. He drank to forget that Soul Society had been changed forever. He drank to forget how much the betrayal hurt. Hinamori had heard that Kira had finished his session with Anohana, so she set out to find him. Besides taking up the healer's advice to spend time with friends, she wanted to talk to the 10th Division Lieutenant about something. It had never escaped her attention that she was not the strongest lieutenant in the Godai 13, that honor probably resided with Renji, now that he had attained Bankai. To be quite honest, her Ryatsu levels were mediocre compared to others of her rank. She knew that Aizen would make his move eventually, and the 13 divisions had to be ready for his next move. The purpose of this visit was to talk with Kira so she could arrange training sessions with him. Out of the lieutenants, he was her only equal in Kido, but was her superior in Zanjutsu. By sparring with Kira, Hinamori hoped to increase her Kido abilities while also bringing her skills with the sword up to snuff. But first she had to find him and let him know about her thoughts. She detected his Ryatsu in the 10th division and closed in on it. It came as no great surprise to walk in on a heavily drunk Kira with Hisagi and Rangiku. She was quite shocked, however, at the state of undress the men were in. Kira-kun. Hisagi-san, she cried out, her face heating up with embarrassment. While she did not have romantic interest in either man, the fact remained that they were both attractive and healthy examples of their gender. Hinamari-kun. Kira groaned, his voice muffled from where he lay face down on the floor. Help, Hisagi moaned pitifully. Never mind, she averted her eyes and backed away. I'll come back later. There you are, Rangiku. Hinamori turned around and saw Captain Ichimaru standing in the doorway with an amused expression at the sight of his drunken wife. Jin, the well-endowed woman sang with a slight slur. Yeah, we're looking for me. One of the telltale signs that Rangiku had entered a deep state of inebriation was her words started to take on her husband's accent, a feat that was somehow simultaneously amusing, adorable, and creepy. Just wondering where ya were is all, Ichimaru said. That's so sweet, oh yeah. Rangiku gushed. Hinamori cringed. Sweet was an adjective she would never use to describe Ichimaru-jin, unless there was a heavily emphasized not in front of it. Having fun? Ichimaru asked. It's not really fun, the lieutenant of the third slurred. Poor Kira and Shihei were depressed over their captain's leaving, so I decided to comfort em a bit. Sake works wonders, ne? Yep, the mirthful menace to life and limb affirmed. Although Hinamori could not tell whether he truly agreed with his wife on that point, or was just humoring her. While there were plenty of rumors as to the questionable existence of his sanity, she had no confirmation either way as to his drinking habits. Ichimaru getting drunk, now there was a frightening thought. The 5th Division lieutenant started walking out the door, but she froze when she heard the captain say, "Where do ya think you're going, Hinamari-chan?" She quickly turned to her superior and bowed. My apologies, Ichimaru Teiko. I didn't know you needed something from me. All right, he chuckled. I don't really need anything, just wanted to talk a lil with ya. About what? She asked as she stood up straight again. Well, whatcha doing here? I was looking for Kira-kun, sir. What for? Hinamori hesitated, wondering how much she could get away with revealing. While she was good friends with Rangiku, she had not formed any such bonds with her husband, and so she was not entirely comfortable voicing her insecurities to him. I just wanted to talk with him about training, she finally said. Now that we're at war with Aizen, we should be working to get stronger. Good thinkin', Ichimaru complimented, either not noticing her near slip-up, or choosing not to comment on it. Though that ain't the only reason ya wanna get stronger, is it? She looked down and to the left, unsettled at how easily he read her. Ya wanna have Hitsugaya back, don't ya? Yes, she answered quietly. Ya wanna tie him up and slap him silly for leavin', ya like that, ne? Hinamori swore she could hear Tobiam vehemently agreeing with that statement, but out loud she quietly murmured, I wouldn't put it that way. Well, best o' luck to ya. Ichimaru Teiko, she blinked in confusion. Ya heard me, the captain said, and walked past her to where his wife was still lying on the ground, barely conscious. With gentleness Hinamori would not have expected of him, Ichimaru bent over and picked his other half up in his arms. And it's time for ya to get home, Rangiku. K, she giggled, and snuggled into her husband's chest. Hinamori blushed a little at the scene and averted her eyes, feeling a trifle voyeuristic. Oh, and before I forget, Ichimaru said as he faced her. After Aizen was found dead, Hitsugaya came to me told me about your breakdown. She frowned at the knowledge that Toshiro would tell something like that to someone else, even if it was hardly a secret. But before she could complain, the captain continued. He told me that if I was responsible for making ya cry, he'd kill me. She blinked, and furrowed her eyebrows. But surely he knew that Aizen wasn't really dead, Hinamori said. Exactly, Ichimaru nodded. My guess is that Hitsugaya was asking me in his own special way to look out for ya while he was gone. The brunette's eyes bulged at the new information, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to laugh or cry. Even now, that overprotective, caring idiot was trying to keep her safe. Why did he ask you? Hinamori inquired. Who knows, he shrugged. Maybe no one else would have picked up on his request. In any case, I've decided to oblige him. What do you mean? She asked nervously. It means I'll be helping ya get stronger, Ichimaru informed her. I don't want to be a bother, Hinamori whimpered. It's no bother, Ichimaru assured her. Even if I wasn't doin' it for Hitsugaya, I'd be doin' it 'cause you're a good friend of Rangiku. She inwardly groaned at the realization that she had the trickster captain as her new sensei. See ya around, the fox said as he walked out of the room with a very happy woman in his arms. He threw a bye-bye to the barely conscious male lieutenants lying on the floor. They just managed to groan out an indiscernible response. Momo sighed. Every time she spoke with that man, she came out of the conversation with a different opinion of him. She should probably start a list of adjectives she had attributed to him over the years: creepy, predatory, mischievous, weird, playful, scary, kind, cruel, loving, and even wise on occasion, but not sweet, never sweet. She shook her head, and decided to head to the library. Some reading would definitely be a relaxing experience for her. Maybe she could also look up some new techniques for her to try in battle. Renji honed on the Ryotsu signature he had come to truly recognize only recently. After leaving Captain Kukaki to rest, the 6th Division Lieutenant sought out someone else he needed to have a little chat with. Which was funny, because it was the one person Renji had never predicted to having an active interest in. Say Sakib-san. The old lieutenant stopped and looked at his approaching ally. Ah, Aburai-san, how are your wounds? He asked. I'm all healed up, Renji answered. Which is why I'm here, I want a rematch. Sasuke blinked in confusion, and then asked, I beg your pardon. The redhead looked at him as if he were a few asashi short of an academy armory. Don't you remember when we fought last time? Yes, he answered cautiously. I'm sorry, but I thought there weren't any ill feelings. There aren't. Renji rushed to say. But now that I've recovered from my wounds, I just want to show you that you were lucky you didn't face me at full strength. Then I will continue to count myself lucky, Sasuke replied. I must decline your invitation. Oh? Afraid to lose, are you? Childish taunts do not work on me. Oh, come on, let's have one spar, just one, that's all I'm asking. Sasuke gave a sigh of resignation, and acceded, very well, if it means so much to you, I'll meet you in the 6th Division training grounds tomorrow after I've completed my duties for the day. Is that acceptable? Renji nodded and grinned ferociously. I'll see you then. Hello there, Rukia-chan. Rukia froze involuntarily at the sound of that unmistakable voice. Despite the fact that he had helped save her life, there was still something about Ichimaru that set her off. Admittedly, in a similar way she no longer feared Byakuya now that she knew he cared for her as a sister. Rukia's uneasiness around Ichimaru had lessened with the knowledge that he had risked his life to help save her. However, the difference was that she now knew her brother's feelings and reasons, while she was still completely in the dark as to Ichimaru's motives. As such, Rukia would remain cautious around this sly man. Greetings, Ichimaru Teiko, she responded politely, and mentally noted that she no longer had to force manners upon herself for a conversation with him. How ya doin'? He asked. I heard ya got cleared o' all your charges. Yes, Rukia confirmed. That's good, Ichimaru said. I was a lil worried that Yamamoto would at least give ya a slap on the wrist for giving powers to a human. Apparently, Yamamoto Soteiko thought that all decisions made by the Central 46 after Aizen took over were to be declared null and void, Rukia said, including the crimes they passed judgment over. Mighty generous o' him, Ichimaru commented. I suppose. Yeah, don't sound too happy for someone who just got pardoned. She did not answer. Got a lot on your mind, huh? Ichimaru guessed correctly, to Rukia's annoyance. I don't blame ya, I heard about the story your brother finally told ya. Again, she declined to respond to his comment. It is a nice lil tale, Ichimaru continued casually. A poor girl, in a moment o' weakness, leaves her baby sister to die so she can survive. The poor, guilt-ridden girl finds happiness in the arms of a noble, who saves her from a life of poverty by marrying her. And after fair maiden dies, the noble takes it upon himself to find the long-lost sister. He succeeds, and happy endings are all round, Jews the way I like it. Unsure of how to respond, Rukia continued to keep her silence. However, Ichimaru said after a mildly dramatic pause. There's just one things that's both er and me, a plot hole, ya might say. Your sister abandoned ya in the 78th district, in Yuzuri, am I right? I have forgiven her for that, Rukia finally said, a cold edge sliding into her voice. So, please, do not try to rile me up by mentioning it. Oh, I ain't referring to that part, the hungry fox casually assured her. I was just wonderin' how a helpless baby survived in one o' the wildest and most dangerous districts o' the Rokanga. The girl blinked. Now that he mentioned it, how had she survived? Before joining up with Renji, she had always been alone. Perhaps someone else took care of me, she suggested uncertainly. So what happened to M? Ichimaru asked. Ya'd think that if they put that much work into savin' ya in such a hostile area, they'd stick round to make sure their efforts didn't go to waste. I don't know, she said. Maybe they got killed themselves, and by that time I was old enough to fend for myself. Then how come ya don't remember, M? This conversation was fast becoming disturbing. I don't know. Well, if ya think the answer, make sure to come in, tell me, any, he grinned, and then gave her a pat on the head. Now I gotta get goin', Ranjika wants me home by dinner time. Wanna join us? Rukia idly realized that she did not have to repress a shudder at the invitation. She had lowered her guard around him more than she thought. Thank you for the offer, but I must decline, she answered. I will be spending time with Ni-Isama. Good for ya, Ichimaru grinned. Make sure to milk every ounce of brotherly love out of him. With that the captain casually walked away without so much as a goodbye, as though he had already forgotten their conversation. For her part Rukia gave a shake of her head. One thing at least hadn't changed, that man always left her feeling deeply perplexed. Author's note, okay, so next chapter, I'll be starting on the Bount arc. USO. Don't worry, none of the filler arcs will be featured as part of the main storyline, although I may be doing a separate short FIC or a bonus chapter set during the Zanpakuto Rebellion, with Jin facing Shinso. As I put in author's note in my one-shot closure, I think a major part of the reason Hinamori took so long to get over Aizen in canon was because she never confronted him for herself to confirm the truth. Here, she hears Aizen's intentions from his own mouth, and while this shakes her up badly, it means that she'll be able to recover faster. There's also another factor in place. Aizen is a master manipulator, and Hinamori spent decades in his service. In canon, Aizen molded Hinamori into becoming so dependent on him that she would break if he left her. In this timeline, he does not warp her mind quite as much. Why not? Think about it, in canon, Aizen's plans never deliberately place Ranjiku in danger. Yes, she participates in battles, but that's only to be expected. Aizen himself never lays a finger on her. It's most certainly because he knows about Jin's feelings towards her, and he does not want a certain snake to kill him. In this timeline, with Hitsugaya on his side, he makes sure that Hinamori has mental constitution enough to cope with him leaving. Thank you for the reviews, a Kisane Gunshot, Julieta, I'm Serious Bro, Raven's Shadow, and anonymous guests. Oh make, Shinigami Illustrated Guide. Hey, look who's up and about, Kirako greeted warmly as he and Nanao saw Jin approach them on the 8th Division's grounds. Anohanateiko cleared you. Yep, yesterday, Jin answered. Jews came by to see how everyone was doing here. Oh, and I had something to say to Nanao-chan. I have something that should be said as well, the lieutenant in question replied. I apologize for the unfair accusations I leveled against you in our last meeting. Funny, that's related to what I wanted to talk to ya about, the Silver Fox said. It is. She blinked. Yeah, you were actually on the right track. I got a confession, Jin said. Yeah, we're right. What do you mean? I tried to kill Aizen. Nanao gave him a very flat look, while Kirako hid his smile behind his hat. But I wasn't acting alone, Jin continued with his smile on its mischievous setting. Komamura Teiko was my accomplice in this nefarious attempted murder. Nanao's eyes became narrower and narrower as her former lieutenant continued on. If you listened carefully, you could hear her teeth grinding together. As for Kirako, his shoulders shook more and more as he did his best to keep from bursting out laughing. But Aizen was a slippery eel, and he got away. After she was certain he was finished, she informed the trickster, "You are not as funny as you think you are." "Yes, I am." Chapter 8, Level Up. Hinamori finally managed to catch Kira while he was sober, working in his office at the third. It didn't take much convincing at all to get him to agree to be her sparring partner. Perhaps he was simply being kind, knowing what she had been through lately. And so, later that afternoon, Kira arrived at the woods around Sokioka Hill to find Hinamori sitting in a meditative pose with drawn sword over her knees. Since he didn't know how long she was going to be in her inner world, he settled down and waited for her to awaken. He had only been sitting a couple of minutes when the girl's eyes fluttered open, and she looked over at him. "Hi, Kira-kun," Hinamori smiled good-naturedly as she stood up and sheathed a biome. She continued, "I hope I didn't keep you waiting long." "You didn't," he assured her as he got to his feet, and then asked, "What type of training were you thinking about?" "Mostly on my Zanjutsu, and also to see if I could refine my Kido," Hinamori answered, and then hesitated before declaring, "And I'm going to start Bankai training." "There's no way you'll be able to finish by the time we go to war with Aizen," Kira warned her. "Maybe," she admitted. "But even if I don't get the second release, training myself on that path will get me stronger all the same." "True. Maybe you should start Bankai training as well." "Might be a good idea," Kira agreed. "I wonder who we should ask to teach us." "You could ask Jin." "Why would Ichimaru tie dash?" Kira paused as he realized that Hinamori was not the one who made the suggestion. The two friends belatedly jumped in surprise and turned towards the two top 3rd Division officers who had snuck up behind them. "Would you stop doing that?" the willowy girl hissed. "Jin, you're right," Rangiku smirked. "This is fun. Why would Ichimaru Teiko wish to teach us?" Kira chose to ignore the sneaking up on lieutenants part and finished his prior question. "Rangiku has also been talking Bankai trainin'," the captain answered. I knew Yaden, Hinamori were talking about doing the same, so we chewed it over and decided to help out." "Why?" Hinamori asked. "I mean, we would be grateful for your lessons, but I didn't know you had taken an interest in us." "Jews, cause your friends Rangiku," Ichimaru shrugged. "If that ain't enough for ya, then look at it this way, if all 3 o' ya get Bankai, then that'll look very good on my record as a captain. Haven't even worn this Haori for a century, and already I've trained 3 students to captain class status." "He doesn't care about his record," his wife assured them. "He is doing this because I asked him to." "But it would still make great bragging material," Ichimaru continued. Kira and Hinamori looked at each other and both bowed to the captain. "We would be honored if you would aid us in our lessons," Kira said solemnly. "Alright, if ya really wanna know Bankai," Ichimaru started, "first ya gotta learn how to fight." "We know that already," Hinamori protested. "No, ya just know where to swing your sword. I'm talking about actually using your head when you're fighting. First and most important lesson, everything's fair game," Ichimaru started off. "All those stories ya heard about heroes fighting honorably and playing fair are all a bunch o' hooey. If winning means stabbing someone in the back, ya do it. If it means kicking 'em while they're down, do it. If ya gotta play dead to get 'em to let their guard down, do it. Strike where the enemy is weak," Hinamori recited. "That's right. Since ya got the basic idea down, I guess you're ready to put it into practice." One moment, Ichimaru was standing calmly in front of them. The next, he was falling upon Hinamori with his Zanpakuto drawn and raised high, ready to come down and cleave her in two. Renji faced his opponent from the opposite side of the training arena. "Ready?" he asked challengingly with Zabamera held out in front of him, yet to be released. "Yes," Sasuke answered simply, his own Zanpakuto held up with one hand in front of his face. "Howl, Zabumaru! Pierce, Gonryomaru!" Just like in their first confrontation, Renji made a standard swing of his long, whip-like sword at his opponent. He knew that it most certainly would not score a hit, but he wanted to test how Sasuke would respond. And just like in their last clash, the elder fighter parried the blade to the side. But this time, the counter-attack was not in the form of Kido. He disappeared in a buzz of Shunpo, and suddenly reappeared right in front of Renji with his rapier thrust forward. Now that he was up at full power, Renji could follow Sasakabe's movements. Even so, the fencer was quick. While Renji just managed to sidestep the blade just in time, he still received a scratch across his chest. He flash-stepped to a good distance away and held a hand to the wound. "First blood to me," Sasakabe announced. "I've gotten cuts worse than this handling paperwork," Renji scoffed. "Still counts," and he held up the point of his rapier to show the tip was now stained crimson. "Well, that's the only blood your sword will get within this fight," the spiky-haired warrior boasted, and swung Zabumaru once again. Sasakabe sidestepped the attack, and attempted to thrust forward once more. Renji took exception to that, and backed up outside of his opponent's range. Keeping his distance from his opponent would be the key to winning this battle. Everyone knows that if two warriors are of equal skill, then the sword with the longer reach wins, Renji said as he continued to move back and whip Zabumaru back and forth. "There are two problems with that statement," Sasakabe replied as he countered each strike with deft movements of his rapier. "First is your assumption that we are of equal skill." "Well, that's mighty big of you to admit," the cocky combatant taunted. "So what's the second problem? What makes you think your reach is longer?" A glint of light on Sasakabe's Zanpakuto was the only warning before a bolt of electricity crackled from the tip of his rapier and connected with Renji's chest. He fell back to the ground in a twitching heap as his senses were overloaded with electrical pulses. Managing to recover after a moment, he leapt back up to his feet to look at his opponent in disbelief. Sasakabe was in a fencer's lunge position, his sword pointed directly at him, and he had a subtle but confident smirk on his face as he said, "Touché." Hinamari's eyes bulged, and she squeaked out a rather ignoble "eep," as she jumped to one side and narrowly escaping the blade that had threatened her with bifurcation. She tried to draw to by him, but another swing from Ichimaru prevented her from doing anything besides avoiding the sharp edge of the blade. As she dodged each successive strike, Hinamori knew that Ichimaru was not trying to kill her. For one, it was highly improbable that he would murder a fellow Shinigami in front of his wife. Second, she knew that a captain like Ichimaru could kill her in the time it took her to blink, if he actually wanted to. The fact that she could follow his movements meant that he was letting her see him, indicating that his intent was to train her, harshly. However, it was pretty hard to tell her brain that he wasn't out to kill her when that deceptively short sword of his was always within inches of slicing her open. That calm yet unnerving smile on his face did not help, either. She needed to do something, anything to give her a second's moment to draw her Zanpakuto. She tried flash-stepping away, but Ichimaru was always right in front of her, not giving her an inch. A desperate idea occurred to Hinamori. She ducked below the next swing and crouched with her hands and feet on the ground. With all her might, Hinamori jumped into the air, swung her foot up, and kicked a certain vulnerable part of Ichimaru's anatomy. She grinned triumphantly as she saw Ichimaru drop his smile and raise his eyebrows in surprise, before she realized two very important things. First, she was still in midair, which meant that very shortly, she would be reuniting with the ground in a rough manner. Second and more urgently, the foot she had used to assault Ichimaru's groin was suddenly registering a massive amount of pain. True enough, Hinamori landed on the grass beneath her quite ungracefully, and she winced as her bottom hit the earth, but that was rather minor compared to the agony her foot was in. "Ow," she cried helplessly, and brought her hands forward to gingerly massage her aching limb. It was as if she had launched her foot at the outer walls of the Siridi instead of what should have been the most vulnerable spot on Ichimaru's person. She could still move her toes, so that meant her foot was not broken, but that was little comfort right now. The sound of uproarious laughter caught her attention, and Hinamori turned her head to see Rangiku as the source, bent over at the waist while holding her sides. Kira's expression of shocked horror would have made her laugh too, if she was not in so much pain at the moment. She imagined that if this was a manga from the world of the living, then Kira's jaw would be on the ground, and his visible eye would be the size of his head. A soft series of chuckles redirected her attention back to her sparring partner, and for a moment, Hinamori was afraid Ichimaru would take advantage of her hapless position to attack. But apparently not, the captain was holding himself upright by leaning on a nearby tree. She realized it was not due to any injury, she knew that it was because Ichimaru found the whole thing as funny as his wife did. If Hinamari's kick had done any damage to him, it evidently did not do anything to diminish his humor. "What do you have under those hakama?" she asked crankily. She blushed belatedly at how that question sounded, and the feeling was reinforced by the sound of two lieutenants hitting the ground. A glance told her that Ranjika was now guffawing so hard that she had collapsed to the ground in tears. Kira had just fallen on his rear in shock. She quickly looked back at Captain Ichimaru, and was only briefly afraid that he would be offended by her inquiry. She knew that as easygoing as Ichimaru was, such a question would likely only amuse him. As she saw his face, she knew she was right. Unfortunately. Why was this unfortunate? Because as Hinamori saw the Vulpin grin, a new and more terrifying prospect emerged. He would actually answer her question. I don't want to know. She zipped her hands from her foot to her ears. A potentially broken foot would be a trifle compared to the damage her mind would undergo by whatever came out of the fox's mouth next. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know. The taunt was enough to snap Renji back into action, and he counterattacked with a swing of Zabumaru. While Sasakabe's Zanpakuto ability was a shock, pun unintended, he was very far from admitting defeat. Besides, it was hardly the biggest surprise he had learned recently. Sasakabe sidestepped the attack and pointed his blade at Renji again, who reflexively flash-stepped to a position to Sasakabe's left, and was immediately glad he had done so. Had that high-voltage attack struck the spot he had vacated only a second before, it might have been all over. All the same, a grin returned to his face. He may not be swift enough to dodge lightning, but he could move faster than his opponent could aim. Renji decided to change tactics, and contracted his sword to its original length as he flash-stepped right in front of his opponent. He brought his saw blade down, but Sasakabe had whipped his rapier to nudge the larger sword to the side and miss its target. Before Renji could try another swing, his sparring partner had already pointed the tip of his rapier at his torso, and a spark flew off the blade. The shock was far less powerful than the first. It was barely more than the jolt one received upon touching an object charged with static electricity. Still, the lightning poke informed Renji that if this had been a real fight, he would have been paralyzed for at least a few seconds, and then summarily killed. Close quarters combat was not as good an idea as he thought it would be, though it was a better strategy than fighting from a distance. So where exactly did that leave him? Even though this was just a sparring match, Renji did not want to lose. He wanted assurance that he was strong enough to protect Rukia. While his fight with Captain Kukaki had shown that he was still years away from defeating an experienced captain-class opponent, he still wanted to prove, to no one but himself, that he could at least beat the other lieutenants. But Sasakabe was too fast, and stronger than he had anticipated. Even at full health, there was no way Renji could beat him with just Shikai. Bankai! Renji shouted. Sasakabe's eyes widened and he braced himself against the explosion of Ryotsu. Hiyo Zabumaru, a confident voice declared proudly from within the winding serpent's bone coils, which separated to reveal their master bedecked in his mantle. Bankai, the elder lieutenant inquired with a raised eyebrow as he regained his composure. For a sparring match. Well, you were tougher than I thought you'd be, Renji admitted with a confident grin. Even so, your second release is not something you should be using so lightly, Sasakabe said disapprovingly. I think you're just scared of losing, the Baboon King taunted. Facing a man in Bankai with just a Shikai, and you think I am scared of losing, the fencer asked dryly. I'm not like one of the elder captains, who could defeat even a well-trained Bankai with just their first release. This fight will be yours. The fencer then lifted his rapier and pointed it at Renji and continued, however, I will make you earn it. The 6th lieutenant saw a spark fly off Sasakabe's blade, and he immediately remembered what followed. In response, Renji had Hiyo Zabumaru charge forward. It was quite fortunate that he did, for the instant after the skeletal snake advanced a bolt of electrical power emerged from the tip of the rapier and struck the living whip directly on its crown. While Sasakabe's attack was blocked by the Bankai, Renji was surprised when Hiyo Zabumaru's charge lost momentum and crashed to the ground in several pieces. Even though it was only a temporary setback, as he could easily call all the pieces back together, it still unnerved him that Sasakabe had enough power to do that to his skeletal serpent. At this point he mentally smacked himself in the head. Sasakabe's Zanpakuto was a lightning type. When he had unleashed that bolt at him, the electrical energy had disturbed the Ryotsu bonds that kept Hiyo Zabumaru in one piece. Additionally, It only made sense that the elder lieutenant's attacks would be stronger now. Earlier, when it was just Shikai on Shikai, they were only sparring, and did not have any real intent to hurt each other. It was only natural that Sasakib's electrical attack would be only enough to stun him for a few moments. Now, when Renji was in Bankai, Sasakib no longer had a reason to hold back on the amount of power he put into those attacks, since he did not have to worry about them seriously harming his opponent. And Renji had to admit, there was a lot of power. He re-evaluated his opinion of Sasakib, and realized that this quiet, lesser-known man might be one of the stronger lieutenants of the Godai 13. Bringing his thoughts back to the here and now, a much more cautious Renji mentally called the pieces of Hyozabumaru to life again. The vertebrae of the serpent rose into the air and surrounded Sasakib, the spikes pointed at their prey. He did not let them attack yet, merely letting the unspoken threat ring out to his opponent. The golden-eyed lieutenant looked at the swarm of spears surrounding him, and then at the man controlling them. "I yield," Sasakib said as he lowered his Zanpakuto and returned it to its sealed form. While he was disappointed that the fight had not lasted longer, Renji accepted the surrender and reverted back to his normal state of power. "Good job," the former vagabond said graciously as he stuck out his hand to Sasakib. "And you," the elder man took the offered hand and gave it a single slow but firm shake. "That," Ranjika gasped, still recovering her breath with deep intakes of air after her long laughing session, "was the funniest thing I've seen in years." "Gotta admit, Hinamari-chan," Ichimaru said in a voice laced with amusement, "I didn't think y'd be ruthless not to kick me below the belt on your first spar." "You said attack weak points," she replied defensively as Kira applied some basic healing Kido to her foot. While she had not broken it, it was still sore, so Kira used what he recalled from his time in the fourth to assuage the pain. "And I'm very glad that ya took my lesson to heart so quickly," Ichimaru congratulated. "There's one other thing I want ya two to work on before I start teaching ya Bankai." "What is it?" Kira asked. "Make sure ya know your Zanpakuto first." Kira and Hinamori blinked in confusion, while Ranjika groaned as she rolled her eyes, and lost the rest of her mirth. "Getting na power to materialize your Zanpakuto is juice part o' the process," Ichimaru explained. "Ya also need to be in tune with M. They're a part o' your soul, and so in order to make M surrender the final release, ya need to know yourself." That's what Ranjika's caught up on. She's almost at the point she can materialize, but she can't stop arguing with Hanko long not to really talk about how they can do Bankai. "It's not my fault she's being difficult. Ya see? If ya don't understand your Zanpakuto and yourself, you'll never get Bankai." "Okay, I think it's time I took Hinamari-kun to the fourth to check out her foot," Ranjika drawled as she picked up Hinamori in her arms. "Thank you for teaching us, Ichimaru Teiko," Hinamori called as she was carried away. "My pleasure," the unusual sensei replied. "I think I will take my leave as well," Kira said. "Thank you for." "Lesson ain't over yet," Ichimaru turned towards the blonde lieutenant. "I wanna know what you've learned at the 10th. A shiver went down Kira's spine, and he realized that he was in for a long training session. "What was that?" Gonryomaru demanded. "You could have taken that little upstart if you had used your Bankai. Why did you yield?" "I have not used my Bankai in combat in 2,000 years, Kojiro replied calmly. "I will not use it just to win a sparring match. This is why nobody knows who you are," the Zanpakuto lamented. "How is it that I'm stuck with a boring nobody for a master? I did not become Yamamoto's lieutenant for fame and glory." "Oh, I've long given up on fame and glory," Gonryomaru snapped. "Right now, I'll settle for simple recognition." "I have recognition," Kojiro said. "From whom, exactly?" "Agi Saidano, for one. I swear, you're worse than Yuka takes third seats. And Yamamoto's going to be the only one who will know you if you keep going on like this. I bet that if you were the one nailed to the wall instead of Aizen, people would be saying, 'Hey, who's that, and why's he wearing a lieutenant's badge?' That was not Aizen, if you will recall, that was only an illusion. You miss the point. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody would notice if you suddenly died on them for whatever reason. Can being boring be a cause of death, by the way? You've always been melodramatic." "Okay, Now I know you're deliberately avoiding the issue, Gonryomaru growled. The only reason Abarai will be remembering you is because you managed to stop him from rescuing Kukaki Rukia. And now that he has proven himself stronger, he's going to promptly forget your existence again. It doesn't matter to me. It matters to me. Why aren't you taking my feelings into consideration? You are unusually persistent on this topic today, aren't you? That's because for the first time in our existence, someone other than your precious Agi Saidano looked at us with respect. Think of how much more respect Abarai would have if he knew we had Bankai. I'm not going to release my Bankai just to create some awe, Kojiro said firmly. Fine. Then look at it this way, training. A moment of hesitation, and the Zanpakuto knew that he had found an opening. What do you mean? Abarai has only recently attained Bankai. You haven't even used yours against an opponent in 2,000 years. Aren't you a bit worried that your skills might be a little rusty? Practicing with Abarai will help him improve his Bankai, while giving us a brush up on ours at the same time. We're going to need all the training we can get if we're going to win this war against Aizen, you know. He can improve his Bankai with his teacher. And who might that be, exactly? Madare Mikeku, the lieutenant answered without missing a beat. Kukaki Teiko was not aware of Abarai's Bankai until the day of Kukaki Rukia's execution. The only other captain Abarai would be close enough to seek lessons from his Kenpei, and he does not even know the name of his Zanpakuto. That leaves us with Madare Mikeku. Think he'll ever figure out that his secret is not such a big secret after all? Gonryomaru asked with a nearly audible smirk. I hope so, otherwise it will get him killed one day. Still, back to the important topic, just because Madare taught Abarai Bankai does not mean they'll continue to practice with each other. After all, Bankai training is not subtle, and I doubt that they will have time to undergo secret fighting sessions. Perhaps, but I do not see why I must be his substitute sensei, Kojiro countered. Will you stop listening to your stubborn streak for 1 minute and listen to me instead? Sparring with Abarai will do more than help the both of us improve our Bankai. With Aizen's betrayal, the Godi 13 needs to work closer together. By having the lieutenants of both the 1st and the 6th interact more regularly, it would mean stronger interdivision ties. Kojiro paused as he thought carefully over his Zanpakuto's words. I suppose you have a point there, he relented. I'll ask Abarai-san if he'll agree to another sparring match. But I will not use this as a publicity stunt. It's a step in the right direction, Gonryomaru said, apparently satisfied for now. Abarai-san. Renji looked up from his paperwork with a raised eyebrow at the man who had just called his attention. Sasakib-san, he asked with a raised eyebrow. Would you be up for another sparring session after you have finished your duties for the day? The elder lieutenant inquired. Oh, I get it, you want a chance to regain your honor, Renji grinned. Sasakib frowned, and attempted to clarify, no. I simply think that with the upcoming war, we should be practicing to get stronger. Oh. There's that, too, Renji said sheepishly, and then cleared his throat nervously. So, where do you want to spar? Same place. We'll train in the 1st Division's training grounds this time, Sasakib answered. Really? The answer took him by surprise. Outsiders rarely entered the grounds of the 1st Division, except for captains and less often lieutenants going to meetings with Yamamoto. Wait outside the gates of the 1st Division, and I will lead you in, the other man said. Will that be agreeable? Sure, Renji replied. I'll head over there after I'm done here for the day. Very good, Sasakib nodded. I will see you then. Rikaki entered the 6th Division's head office with a collection of forms for the captain to fill out, and walked in just in time to hear Captain Kukaki ask Abarai, what did he want? He just wanted to arrange another sparring match between us, the lieutenant told him. It'll be down at the 1st Division after I'm finished with my duties today. A sparring match? Rikaki said excitedly. With who? Sasakib Fukutaiko, Abarai answered. Who? The lieutenant of the 1st Division. Oh. I'm sure you'll win, Abarai-san. Yeah, but only if I use both releases, his hero confessed. I gotta admit, he's tough and fast enough that I don't think I'd ever beat him with just my first release. Well, Good thing you have Bankai. Rikaki laughed. You may leave, Abarai Renji, Kukaki intoned as he handed over the completed paperwork. Yes, sir, his lieutenant bowed and said a quick bye to Rikaki on his way out of the captain's office. You admire Abarai Renji, the noble captain stated. Yes, sir, Rikaki jumped at being addressed. Every individual who has ever attained Bankai has had their name written down in the history of Soul Society, the Lord continued on. Yesterday I personally added Abarai Renji to that list. Rikaki paid close attention to his captain. He suspected that the man was not finished saying whatever it was he wanted to say. As the head of the Kukaki clan, one of my duties is to memorize the name of every single person who has ever attained Bankai, Kukaki continued. And I can tell you that the name Sasakaibe Kojiro Tadaoki is near the beginning of that list. The younger man gaped. Why didn't you tell Abarai-san that? The unseated officer asked. While Abarai Renji is a good officer, with his courage and determination, the captain answered. He needs to learn to not underestimate his opponents. This will be a good opportunity for him to learn that lesson without endangering his life. Kukaki then leveled his gaze directly at Rikaki, and the unseated Shinigami instinctively glanced downward to avoid the insubordinate action of looking a superior officer, and a noble to boot, in the eye. That is why you are not to inform Abarai Renji of this until after his sparring match with Sasakabe Fukotaiko. Yes, sir, Rikaki said. You are dismissed. Yes, sir, the spiritual featherweight bowed and left the room. He had to talk with somebody about what he had just learned. Since Kukaki had ordered him not to tell Abarai, the lieutenant was off the list, but there were still the other unseated officers. Kian rushed through the 13th Division with the news in mind. She had heard numerous rumors over the years, but none were as incredible as the piece she had just heard in her mind. She had to get to Captain Yucatake as quickly as possible, as he was the only one she trusted to dispel or confirm this rumor. If she recalled correctly, her captain was currently in the gardens relaxing. Of course, Big Stupid Sentaro had been with her at the time she had heard that newest bit of gossip, so that meant he, too, was now rushing to beat her to Captain Yucatake's presence to inquire about the same thing that was on her mind. They found him in the company of his oldest friend, Captain Kiraku, and Naneo. Yucatake Teiko, the 2/3 seats chorused as they dropped in front of the object of their worship. Kian? Sentaro? What is it? The confused captain asked. Does Sasakabe Fukotaiko have Bankai? They chorused their question. Don't copy me! Kian shouted. I didn't. You copied me. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Please don't argue, Yucatake interrupted. Immediately the bickering pair ceased their argument and bowed to their captain. Many apologies, Yucatake Teiko. Needless to say, this was also spoken simultaneously. Now, why do you wish to know about Sasakabe-san's Bankai? The white-haired man continued. So he does have one? Kian asked in shock. Rangiku had been a good friend to take Hinamori to the 4th, not to mention stay by her side and keep her company while they waited for a healer to enter the room and treat the petite girl's foot. But Hinamori thought it a bit suspicious that the moment she felt Anohana's Ryotsu approach, Rangiku had to use the restroom. Your appointment with me is not for another 2 days. So why are you here now? Hinamori whimpered just a little upon hearing Anohana's voice in a dangerously placid tone. A blush crept onto the girl's cheeks, and she mumbled out her answer. Please repeat that, Hinamori-kun, so that I can hear you, Anohana told her. The girl swallowed and repeated herself just within audible range. I tried to kick Ichimaru Teiko in the... She could not finish the sentence. However, judging by the blush, Anohana could guess the answer. I see, she smiled in amusement. You kicked him in the groin. Please, Anohana Teiko, Hinamori begged as she covered her hands with her face. I really don't want to talk about it. The healer gave the girl some mercy. Let me see that foot, Anohana beckoned. Hinamori nodded mutely and the red receded from her face as the older woman walked over to her bed and examined her injury. I am very curious, however, Anohana spoke as she began the healing process, as to why you would do such a thing, and how Ichimaru Teiko reacted afterwards. As the young lieutenant reluctantly recounted as to how she tried to emasculate Ichimaru-jin, Anohana worked on restoring Hinamari's injured limb to its proper state. And while I can understand Ichimaru Taiko's desire to train you for the upcoming war, I will make sure he knows that training you too hard will cause you further harm, Anohana concluded. And also inform him that due to his own recent injuries, Ichimaru Taiko should not be pushing himself too far, either. I will, Anohana Taiko, Hinamori accepted. Captain, there you are. Anohana and Hinamori turned to see Isane running towards them. Is it true, Anohana Taiko? The vertically advantaged lieutenant gasped. Isane, catch your breath, and then calmly tell me exactly what you wish to know, the matronly woman instructed. Her subordinate nodded and took several deep breaths. After she had managed to restore her heart rate to a more normal level, she asked, "Does Sasakib-san really have a Bankai?" Kojiro frowned as he and Abarai entered the 1st Division's training arena and observed the crowd of officers from other divisions sitting on the sidelines. He saw the captains of the 4th, 6th, 8th, 11th, and 13th, along with their lieutenants, and in the case of the latter 2 divisions, the 3rd seats as well. Also present were the lieutenants from the 3rd and 5th, and to Kojiro's surprise, he recognized other officers from the 1st Division standing off on their own, separate from the rest of the other Shinigami. Unlike his Zanpakuto, the 1st Division's lieutenant did not like performing in front of an audience. He preferred being in the background, doing whatever was required of him out of sight of the masses. He sent an inquiring glance at his sparring partner. "Don't look at me," Abarai held up his hands defensively. "I didn't know they were going to be here." "Nor did I," a deceptively mellow voice grumbled behind them. Abarai jumped to stand at attention when he recognized the speaker, while Kojiro did the same in a calmer manner. Captain Commander Yamamoto, of course, did not look surprised by this. "Why did you not inform me of this?" the head captain inquired. "I did not realize that a sparring match would be high enough on your priority list to attend," the white-haired lieutenant answered. "Any duel with you as a participant is one I dare not miss," the general replied. "Carry on." He strode past them, every other footstep accentuated by a tap of his cane on the ground, to position himself in a spot between the members of the 1st Division and the rest of the Godai 13 officers who were present. "No pressure, huh?" Abarai muttered. "I mean, we only have the majority of captains and lieutenants watching to see how our duel goes." "I suppose we should go get it over with," Kojiro murmured back in agreement, and then moved to the other side of the sparring arena. Renji could honestly sympathize with his sparring partner. He could tell that Sasakib was uncomfortable with being watched by so many of his peers and superiors, perhaps that was why he had never called much attention to himself. Renji was not bothered by having an audience like the 1st lieutenant obviously was, but when 2 of the spectators were their captains, his nerves got in the mood to want to run away. It didn't make sense that he should feel embarrassed. He was the one who wielded Bankai in this fight, his Bankai whose power could already be attested to by his captain, so why did he feel this way? Maybe it was out of sympathy. Sasakib was strong, but he was the weaker of the 2, and Renji was about to prove it in front of his captain. He gave a brief thought to going easy on the older man, but decided quickly that it would have been an insult. He would fight, he would win, and his opponent would put up a good resistance in the process. This time, it was Sasakib who made the first move. As soon as they had both released their Zanpakuto, the fencer had flash-stepped directly in front of him and plunged the tip of his blade forward. Renji just managed to sidestep the thrust in time, but Sasakib's follow-up attacks were rapid and persistent. It was all the 6th lieutenant could do to block or parry the rapier which threatened to perforate him. With each attack that came within inches of hitting home, Renji noticed the difference from the last time they had fought and now. In their prior sparring session, the golden-eyed man had been more testing and probing in his attacks. Now, Sasakib's was on the offensive as he aggressively thrust his rapier forward and attempted to turn Renji into shish kebab. Finally, Renji saw an opening. Just as Sasakib finished lunging forward, the brawny warrior pulled his left fist back and drove it directly into his face. His adversary reeled back, both from the fist's force, and surprise that a fist had managed to connect. Renji grinned at taking his opponent off guard, and followed up by whipping Zabumaru out. To his credit, Sasakib recovered well enough in time to parry the attack. He blocked the next two swings as effectively as he had the first, and then a spark seemed to light off the fencer's blade. Renji's grin fell, and he jumped out of the way with the knowledge of what would come next. A jagged line of white electricity scorched the ground where the red-haired man had just leapt from, and there were some gasps of surprise from the audience at the sight of Sasakabe's Shikai ability. Renji attempted a counter-attack, but each time he tried, the first lieutenant sent out a measured streak of lightning to keep him moving and to prevent him from going on the offensive. As he flash-stepped away from another electrical bolt, Renji knew he was going to have to level up sooner than he thought if he still wanted to win this fight. Bankai. The explosion of Ryotsu forced Sasakabe to leap backwards to a safe distance. Hiyo Zabumaru. Renji announced with no small amount of pride in his voice. He noticed in his peripheral vision that the spectators were looking at him in varying levels of interest and awe. Renji only let himself have a brief moment of satisfaction at their reactions, and focused his attention on his opponent. To his confusion, Sasakabe was not looking at him in surprise or disapproval like in their prior fight. As a matter of fact, it seemed just the opposite. It looked like he wanted Renji to go Bankai. The Baboon King's puzzlement was compounded when his opponent raised his Zanpakuto into the air, the tip pointed at the sky. Then, in a voice full of subtle but immovable resolution, he declared, "Bankai." What? With the declaration of a second release, Ganryomaru transformed into a bolt of lightning in his hand, and shot into the sky. Then the jagged line of white-hot energy left his grip and ascended upwards to form a shallow dome over his head. An instant later, bars of electricity struck the ground from the edge of the dome, and formed a cage to protect him. Koko Ganryo Rikyu. Kojiro did not realize how much he had missed the feeling of being in Bankai, the delicious high of having so much raw power at his fingertips. As the golden royal villa of the stern spirit reached into the heavens, that power only multiplied. In truth, the majority of the strength behind his attacks was generated by the weather. He may have brought the storm clouds into existence, but those clouds were the power source for his electrical defense and attack. The only Ryotsu that was needed while he was in Bankai was the energy to keep the storm going. While that was still represented a great amount, it was still less than most other captains required to maintain their most powerful release, which meant he could also fight with his Bankai longer than most. This also meant that he had a nearly infinite pool of electrical energy from which to draw his attacks, since they came from the storm and not from his own power. As the rain began to fall on the sparring arena, Aburai Renji stood still and stared at him like he had just broken some law of nature. "Pay attention, Aburai," the Storm Lord commanded, and accentuated his order by mentally calling down a bolt of lightning a few feet to his opponent's left. He had trained enough that gesturing with his hands was an unnecessary motion. The white flash had already registered to the redhead's eyes and thunder assaulted his ears before he jumped and whipped his head towards the source, only to find a black mark on the ground still smoking. Aburai's eyes snapped back to his adversary. His eyes were still wide, but it seemed that his focus was now on the battle. And focused it was, now that it was clear to Renji that he was dealing with an equal or superior opponent. He threw his strength into Hiyo Zabumaru's next charge. Kojiro calmly stood in place and waited for the snake monkey to connect their attack on him. The skull crashed into the bars of lightning standing between it and the lieutenant inside, and with a roar resembling pain, the skeleton fell apart. That was part of Koko Ganryo Rikyu's defense. He was protected inside his cage of lightning from most forms of attack. While Aburai looked in horror at his Bankai's inability to dent his enemy's defenses, Kojiro wondered what his next move should be. His original plan had been to simply try out Koko Ganryo Rikyu, and make sure he could still use him efficiently. But now that he was in Bankai, Kojiro realized that there was very little he could do without causing serious harm to Aburai. While the 6th lieutenant was capable of the legendary release, he was still too new at it for them to practice together safely. So the ancient man decided that it would be better if the sparring session ended sooner rather than later. He sent another mental call to have a lightning bolt strike the ground, this time just to Aburai's right. While the attack did not directly make contact, the proximity to the super-hot bolt made him jump instinctively away, and the deep rumble that immediately followed the strike deafened him for a moment. This time, Aburai-san, Kojiro called out so he could be heard over the pouring rain and retreating thunder, "The victory is mine. Yield." Renji seemed to have enough of his hearing back to catch his opponent's command, as evidenced by the narrowed eyes of defiance. Then there was a pause of contemplation, and then a nod of acceptance. Aburai relaxed his posture, and sealed Hiyo's Abameru into their original katana form. In response, the rain stopped, and the clouds lightened to whiter colors and then drifted away, and there was a sealed blade at Kojiro's belt again. When he had last released Bankai to fight someone, it had been against Yamamoto, 2,000 years ago. Then, he was a young man eager to prove his worth to the legendary demigod. In that battle, there was no question as to who would win, the only uncertainty was whether the youngster would actually be strong enough to make Yamamoto bleed. Now, the old lieutenant realized he was in Yamamoto's position. He was the elder testing out the Bankai of an ambitious young man. His musings were interrupted as he noticed his sparring partner march forward. It seemed that the shock of his second release had yet to fade from Aburai's mind, for the first words out of his mouth were, "If you have Bankai, then why don't you become a captain?" "I don't want to." Aburai's jaw dropped. It was quite amusing to watch, but Kojiro managed to conceal his humor. "But there are 3 divisions that need captains," the young fighter protested. "My place is in the 1st division, as Yamamoto Dano's right arm," he said firmly. "Captaincy is not, and never will be, my future." The younger lieutenant was silent for a moment as he stared at Sasaki. "But I thought that," Renji said hesitantly. "You thought that everyone who attained Bankai went on to become a captain when a position opened up," he finished. "That is true for the most part. However, there have been a few others besides myself who, for a number of reasons, chose not to seek out promotion." Deciding to let the youngster contemplate his words, and hopefully pass them along to a certain 3rd seat, Kojiro decided to end their conversation. He gave a bow of respect to his opponent and then walked away. Before he had gotten too far out of earshot from the rest of the spectators, he heard his captain call his name. "Kojiro," Yamamoto intoned to his lieutenant. "I could feel that you were not working at full power against Aburai Fukutaiko." "No," the eldest lieutenant confirmed. "I did not want to kill him, after all." Yamamoto hummed in agreement. "I do believe the time has come to test the truth of your vow," the captain commander spoke. "I wish to see if your Bankai is still as childish as it was 2,000 years ago." Kojiro smiled. Where and when, Ajai Saidano. Chapter 9, Aaron Carr. Ichigo was annoyed. He was somewhat okay with the team of Shinigami showing up at his school. He was even fine with Rukia kidnapping him from his body, because at least she got him out of the blue funk he was in. However, he was not okay with Renji, Yumichika, and Ikeku invading his room by coming in through the ceiling light. Could they not have used the window like Rukia normally did? Ichigo belatedly realized that his life was far too weird if he considered his window to be an acceptable entrance to his bedroom. "What did you do to my light?" he demanded of his intruders. "We tried installing a new light bulb," Renjiku joked. "With what?" the follicle-lacking fighter asked as he hung down from the ceiling. Renjiku frowned at his obliviousness, and pushed him in the head, sending him on a premature journey to the floor. "Don't be so uptight," she scolded Ichigo. "I'm surprised that your joker of a husband didn't come down with you," the teenager scowled. "Nah, I did something different." Ichigo jumped at the fox's voice. Hoping against hope, he looked at the window in the very remote possibility that Jin had actually decided on the sane and rational course of action. Of course, since that would have been the sane and rational course of action, he was not there. "Jin? Where are you?" "Right here." As the reluctant host to the team of Shinigami turned around, his jaw dropped below his knees. The closet door had opened, revealing the smiling captain sitting there with his legs now dangling out casually. Like the others, he was still in his Jigai and school uniform, his shirt untucked and the top button undone. The substitute Shinigami sputtered for a few seconds, before finally deciding on a lucid question. "How did you get in there?" He at least took pleasure in the fact that the rest of the Shinigami seemed to be as confused as he was at how Jin got into the closet. "Don't be nosy, Ichigo," Jin chided. "Didn't ya want to know about Aaron Carr?" Ichigo stuttered for a few more moments before coming to the realization that he was better off not knowing. "Fine. What are they?" Renji and Rukia volunteered to explain, the latter being much less helpful in Ichigo's opinion. After learning about the Aaron car, he asked about why these particular Shinigami were chosen to come to the living world. Rukia was picked because she knew you the best, Renji started explaining. Not true. Rukia protested indignantly, I was selected because of my abilities. Her interjection was ignored. I'm the closest to Rukia out of the available fighters, so I was chosen, Renji continued. Ichigo could understand that. The lieutenant was a good fighter, and it was more practical to have Shinigami assigned here who were already familiar with some of the people they needed to work with. And then I was told to pick out some fighters that I could trust who were below captain class. So I asked Ikeku. Again, Ichigo could follow the logic there. He knew from personal experience that the third seat was a good guy to have on your side in a fight. And then Yumishika-san insisted on going. The substitute Shinigami suddenly had a feeling that logic was about to have a decreasing factor in choosing the fighters from here on. When Ranjiku-san heard the commotion he was making, she said that she wanted to come since it seemed interesting. Yes, it seemed that logic and reasoning only had a vote in 3 of the fighters, and left the rest to absurdity and frivolity. Ranjiku-san wouldn't hear of being left behind, and so Ichimaru Teiko came along as the leader. Beat. Or something like that. What is this, a picnic? Ichigo asked in exasperation. Okay, now for part 2 of your lesson, Ichigo, Jin interjected. The silver-haired captain went on to explain the 3 classes of Minos, Jillian, Ajichas, and Vastolord. After he finished the lecture, Ichigo had one last thing he wanted to ask. So when are you going back? We're not, Renji answered. Until this battle with the Aaron car is over, we'll be staying in the world of the living. Well, where will you guys be sleeping then? 6 people looked at him expectantly. And don't even think about staying here, there's too many of you, and my family would definitely notice, Ichigo preemptively denied. That's okay, we'll ask Orium-chan if we can stay at her place, Ranjiku said pleasantly. Coming, Jin. Right behind ya, Ranjiku, he said as he followed his wife out the window. After Ikeku and Yumichika followed suit, Ichigo turned towards the other 2 team members. I'll be staying at Urahara's, Renji assured the substitute, and exited the room via the window. So, where are you staying? Ichigo asked Rukia. Last time she lived in town, she had stayed in his room, so he didn't know who she was going to ask for a place to live. Rukia just smirked at him. No. Ichigo denied. Her smirk stayed. I said no. Smirk. Rukia. This was his room and his house, so why was Rukia the one in charge? Jin sat on the roof of Orium's place, looking up into the sky. After easily obtaining the okay to stay, Jin had gotten a quick bite to eat before quietly vacating the room. He could see that there was something on the human girl's mind, and he figured she wanted to let it out to somebody. He knew that his wife was far better at comforting people than he was. Ranjiku had certainly tried to teach him the finer points of compassion and empathy, but even after 100 years, such skills were still elusive to him. So, he decided to let the girls have a private talk. That was okay with him. It was a beautiful evening, and the view of the night sky in the world of the living was a treat he was not able to indulge in often. Jin let his eyes open more fully to allow him a better view of the stars. They were arranged differently here than they were in Seoul society. He could tell because he and Ranjiku had spent nights every now and then just lying together and looking up into the wonder of the night sky. Jin wondered why the stars looked off here, and whether or not the reason for that difference lay solely in the fact that this was the living world, or if there were other factors involved. Jin had once visited the 12th to ask if they had done any research in astronomy. Astronomy? Mayuri looked up from his computer with 9 parts annoyance and 1 part curiosity at the trespasser. There was a list of individuals he had long given up trying to keep out of his laboratory. Top of that list were Kuzugishi Yachiru and Ichimaru Jin, and the latter was the one that was now present. While the fox was intruding on precious time for experimentation, at least it was made up by the fact that he was seeking scientific knowledge. Astronomy, his erstwhile ally confirmed. Yeah, no, study the stars and all that. We haven't much interest in such a branch of research, the scientist answered. Astronomy is primarily calculation of planetary trajectories and aiding timekeeping. Prediction for eclipses, for example. Since we have computers, we have little need to further explore astronomy. Ain't ya even curious? Jin asked. Of course, Mayuri replied. But I have other, far more interesting projects on my mind right now. Perhaps some other day, I'll take another look. Now, is there anything else you wish to know, or are you here just to annoy me? His thoughts were interrupted by Ranjika coming up to the roof in her night clothes. Orium-chan and I are about to have dinner, she said. Do you want to join us? Nah, I already snacked, he answered. He wondered idly how the human girl was going to react to his wife's odd tastes. How'd the girl talk go? I don't confide and tell, Jin, you know that, she scolded him with good humor. I didn't ask what ya talked about, I asked how it went, he riposted. She smirked at his counter. She's feeling better now. Good. Ya better get back down, ya don't wanna keep our hostess waitin'. Enjoy the view, she said, referring to his watching of the night sky. I will, he promised. Ranjika pecked him on the cheek and went back down into Orium's apartment. Jin sighed as he settled back down on the roof. While he could not hear the specifics, he could definitely tell that both the girls were enjoying their meal. That either meant that Ranjika had come across normal food that she liked, or Orium's tastes were just as abnormal as his wife's. Very early on, Jin and Ranjika made a simple deal about her cooking. He would try every single one of her creations once, and he would be honest about the taste. It was actually a better arrangement than either had expected. There was a 1 in 3 chance that Jin would find her meals weird good, weird neutral, or weird bad. It was only every now and then that she made something he truly couldn't force past his gag reflex. Sometime later, as he pondered the culinary habits of his spouse, he felt it, the appearance of a hostile incursion. The Ryotsu had the familiar vile aura of a hollow, but was somehow tempered by the presence of something akin to a Shinigami. These had to be Arrancar. Jin popped the small green pill in his mouth and told the Jikangan to find a safe spot to hide. Ranjika was up only a second later, in her natural spiritual form and with her Zanpakuto drawn. Orium-chan safe? He asked. Yes, I had her watch over my Jigai so that she wouldn't try to join the fight. Get ready, Ranjiku, they're here. A moment after he had spoken, 2 figures appeared in front of them in the air in a manner similar yet different to Shunpo. Nice to meet you, greeted the taller, slimmer figure on the left, and then vanished. Jin knew there was only one place an attacking enemy would go after he had disappeared from in front of you. He quickly drew Shinso and pivoted on his feet to block the strike from behind. Jin. Ranjika was forced to jump away as the other enemy attacked her. A moment of silence followed as the combatants measured their opponents. I am Arrancar 11, Shalong, Jin's opponent finally said. Ichimaru Jin, he replied cordially. Captain of the 3rd Division. Nice to meet ya, too. Introductions finished, Jin pushed against his enemy, and they separated. He made sure to catch up to the hollow, and they faced each other once more on the roof of a nearby building. Captain of the 3rd Division, Shalong said, and then a small, satisfied smile lit his features. My, how wonderful. It looks like I hit the jackpot. Jin elected not to reply, and simply changed the setting on his smile from standard to intimidating. He was quite pleased when Shalong's smug smile straightened into a cautious frown. With no further warning, the Vulpin captain leapt forward and struck with Shinso. Krell, Hanko, Ranjika called out in between swings of the enemy's fists, and the ash storm rose to her command. It was quite evident that with her Ryotsu meter activated, the rotund enemy assaulting her was clearly her match in strength and speed. With her blade now a cloud of ash, the lieutenant could now focus on dodging each punch sent at her, and did not have to worry about trying to find an opening. Hanko would drift through any gap in the enemy's defense. Ranjika swung her hilt, and the ashcat pounced. Sparks flew off the Arrancar's hide as the millions of particles of Ranjika's Zanpakuto scratched at his skin, but there was no significant damage. My arrow is too strong for you to break through, the giant informed her arrogantly. Even the toughest armor has its weak spot, Ranjika rejoined. And my Zanpakuto is good at finding them. On that note, she swung her hilt again, and the cloud swirled across her enemy's body and dove towards his throat. The thinner skin at the neck was more vulnerable, and Hanko succeeded in drawing blood with her claws. The Arrancar's eyes widened at the unexpected piercing of his iron flesh, and disappeared from the clutches of the incorporeal Zanpakuto. Just like her husband, Rangiku knew what would happen next. So in response, she swung the hilt of her sword as she pivoted 180 degrees. As expected, the corpulent man was behind her with his fist raised above his head and ready to bring it down on her head. Before the blow landed, Hanko blocked the fist as she blew in between her wielder and the Arrancar. That was pretty fast, Rangiku admitted to her opponent as she held back his fist. It's a lot like our shunpo, what do you call yours? Sonito, the Arrancar replied haughtily. A minute into the fight, Xiaolong took a moment to pause and briefly looked off into the distance. One of your guys got killed, didn't they? Jin asked, also feeling the sudden drop of Ryotsu. And if he was not mistaken, it was Rukia who had dealt that blow. He made a mental note to give the girl a congratulatory pat on the head next time he saw her. One of our weaker brethren, Xiaolong replied calmly. Do not make the mistake of believing that Deroy's death makes your victory certain. It sure don't help your side, Jin replied, and attacked again. The two duelists clashed 3 times, and the captain pulled away first. Xiaolong managed to get a scratch in, and a small amount of blood began to trickle from the wound on the left side of his face just below the eye. Not bad, Jin admitted as he gingerly touched the nick on his cheek. Yeah, got me that time. It will not be the last injury I will inflict on you, Xiaolong promised. Don't make promises you're not sure ya can keep, the fox taunted back. He subtly checked Rangiku's condition. She had already released her sword, and was still having trouble fighting her opponent. Still, she was holding her own for now, and since Jin could not do anything to help her at the moment, the status quo would have to remain. However, that did not mean that he would not do something to end the fight quicker. Shoot to kill, Shinso. Xiaolong's eye widened in surprise at the sudden release of Shikai, and just managed to block it before Jin scored a hit. Quickly recovering, the Arrancar disappeared and reappeared behind Ichimaru with his blade ready to fall. Not exactly a fast learner, this one. Jin had easily predicted the move and leveled Shinso back beneath his armpit. The fang of his sword pierced through his haori and scored a hit on the astonished hollow. It was not a very deep one, just a cut in the oblique muscle, but it was a hit, and forced Xiaolong to retreat by leaping away. Jin retracted his blade and faced him, and from his relatively safer position, the Arrancar considered his foe. I'm surprised you managed to hit me, he said. Even though you are only at Shikai, you managed to catch me by surprise. But that is the extent of your power in this state, is it not? Your sword relies more on keeping your opponent at a distance rather than overpowering them with raw strength. You hope to kill me by staying away and not allowing me to close in for a counter-attack. Yeah, figured it out, Jin admitted. While his enemy's deductions were not incorrect, they were far from the whole, accurate story. But the wary warrior saw no reason to change the Arrancar's mind, so he kept mum about his own abilities. Instead, he asked, so what you gonna do now? How prepared are you for the eventuality that your opponent would be fast enough to close that gap, was all Xiaolong inquired before he raised his blade vertically and declared, slice, Taijarita. A smile painted the Arrancar's lips as an explosion of Ryotsu rushed past Jin. When the smoke cleared, Xiaolong appeared in his resurrection form. He studied his skeletal hands for a moment before attacking. Jin saw it coming, but just barely. He only managed to step back enough to let the tip of Xiaolong's claw run across his torso. While the wound was shallow, the sheer length did mean that blood was pouring out of his body fast. On instinct, Jin focused his Ryotsu into the wound to stop the bleeding. He did not do anything more, because he still needed enough spiritual power to kill his opponent. Huh, the captain remarked looking down at his injury. Yeah, got me that time. I told you that I would inflict another wound on you, Xiaolong commented lightly. However, I'm surprised you managed to step back in time to prevent that cut from completely bisecting you. Even so, if this is your maximum speed, you will not stand a chance. Why don't you try your Bankai? You will need it if you wish to have any chance at beating me. Truth be told, Jin had been contemplating that course of action, but he did not like the idea of revealing his full power to someone who was probably just a henchman. True, With the restriction on, the release of Bankai would be about the equivalent of releasing Shikai, but it was still the principle of the matter. Besides, this provided Jin with a chance to test his wits. What, Jews cause ya grew your nails out? Jin shrugged. I don't need no Bankai for that, Jews nail clippers. The Arrankar narrowed his eyes in annoyance, and leapt forward to attack again. This time, the fox was prepared, and blocked the long, bony fingers which threatened to shred him to bits. I'm serious, ya should be more careful, Jin smirked. Next time ya feel the need to scratch your nuts, ya might end up a eunuch. Shalong appeared only mildly annoyed at his opponent's taunts. You will reap the fruits of your arrogance soon enough, the Arrankar calmly swore. Ranjika was reaching the edge of her limit, while the assault on her enemy's eye and throat served well to force him to relocate. His Sonido allowed him to escape Hanko's claws before too much damage could be inflicted. Ichimaru Ranjika-sama. You are hereby authorized to use full force. The news from the radio made the woman grin triumphantly. Jin. Renji, she called out to her allies, we've got permission to break the restriction. The division's leader let his smile become a predatory grin as he heard Ranjika's announcement. Better late than never, I guess, he said rhetorically, savoring the feel of the invisible collar lifting. What's this? Shalong asked in return, a small amount of concern beginning to show on his face for the first time, but it was quickly suppressed. Limit, release, was Jin's only response, and he could feel the other two combatants also letting their full power out. Ryotsu from 3 Shinigami flared blue, and sent beams of light into the sky. Did you say, limit, release? The would-be raider asked, now not bothering to conceal his surprise. The smoke cleared, and Jin appeared before the Arrankar refreshed with his wounds partly closed. Yeah, sorry, Shalong, but you're gonna die now, the captain said to his opponent playfully. Yeah, see, whenever someone lieutenant or higher goes to the living world, their power is sealed to about 1/5. In certain situations, we can get permission to remove the seals, situations like these, for example. Shalong's attention was diverted when he saw one of his fellow Fraxion destroyed by Renji. Upon the realization that he was now outclassed, the insectoid Arrankar called to his remaining comrade for a retreat, just in time to see Ranjika use Hanko simply shred the large Arrankar into dust. Seeing that he was the only one left, Shalong ran. Jin scolded as he observed his opponent's flight, before letting Shinso strike with her full strength. The serpentine blade hissed in joy as she pierced the Arrankar's chest. Shalong screamed in pain, but was quickly silenced as the blade moved upward and neatly cut his skull in half. The image of shock and fear was split in two before Shalong's body dissipated. Jin let out a sigh, and Raseo led his Shikai. Jin. The addressed captain looked down to see his wife standing next to Orium and her Jikunga on the rooftop. Are you all right? She called. I'm good, he answered as he descended to their position. Though if ya don't mind, Orium-chan, I wouldn't object to ya healing these scratches. No problem, the human girl acquiesced, and mentally called out two of her Shun Rika. You only sustained 2 injuries, Ichimaru Teiko, the Jikungan asked as the subtle hum of Orium's powers did their work, its English accent sounding weird from the voice box of his Jigai. When Jin went to get a Jikungan for his mission to the living world, he wanted one that had a Kansai accent like his. They didn't have any, so he decided to pick the one with a fox's head on it. The result was a Jikungan with a British accent that sounded almost as creepy as the man he impersonated. Jin took a liking to it immediately. Yep, the captain answered as he felt his battle's injuries disappear, and the Soten Kishun returned to their owner's hair. As soon as he was released from her healing sphere, Ranjika rushed forward and tightly wrapped her arms around his torso. In reply, Jin put an arm around her and whispered to her, I'm okay, Ranjiku. I was worried about you, she said softly. Oh, Kmin, that guy was barely worth mentioning, he assured her, and then turned his attention to Orium, who was quietly trying not to look at the scene before her. He placed his free hand on her head, and said, Thanks, Orium-chan, I owe ya one. Oh, no, you don't, the girl rushed to reply. It wasn't a problem. You know, we should check on the others, Ranjika reluctantly spoke up. They might need Orium-chan's healing abilities. Ah, but I wanna stay here and snuggle, Jin pouted. Yes, it's very comfortable, but we need to make sure no one else is dead or dying. All right, fine, the captain relented as he let go of his wife. Stay in the apartment until we come back, Rangiku instructed the Jikangan. They both nodded and left. Jin picked up Orium in his arms with a squeak of protest from the girl before flash-stepping towards the nearest riot source, Rangiku following right behind him. A few minutes later, they found a bruised Ichigo and an unconscious Rukia on the roof of a building. Jin quickly set down both himself and the flustered human girl and announced their presence with, "Someone need a healer." Inu. Jin. Rangiku-san. Orium's sight first went to the large number of Ichigo's bruises, but then she saw Rukia lying unconscious with a stab wound to her abdomen and her Jikangan weeping over her. She immediately ran to the petite Shinigami and with a call to her Shun Rika began her work. "So, how'd your fight go?" Jin asked Ichigo. The substitute did not answer, instead looking off to the side unhappily. Well, ya win some, ya lose some," the captain shrugged. "You fought an espada, didn't you?" Rangiku asked. Ichigo looked at her in surprise, and Jin also sent an inquiring smile to her. "The guy I fought was bragging about it," she explained. "The espada are Aizen's top 10 Arrancar, some of his strongest fighters." "Yeah, my guy said the same thing," the captain confirmed. "Grimjo was his name, right?" "Yeah," the human teen nodded. "Is Rukia-san going to be okay?" Rangiku asked. "I think so," Orium replied. "I'll take care of your wounds next, Kurosaki-kun." "K," he said dully. Now, the captain chided. "If ya go back to Bane all depressed, I'll have to tell Rukia-chan on ya. And when I tell her, she's gonna kick your behind to Hueco Mundo and back." "By the way, Jin," Ichigo said, a small bit of life returning to his voice. "I've been meaning to ask you something that's been on my mind. Why is Rukia scared of you?" "A lot of people are scared o' me," he shrugged. "Rangiku-san isn't," Ichigo pointed out. "She's known me since we were kids. And I'm not." "Yeah, but you're weird like that, so yeah, don't count." Ichigo gave him a look that very plainly said, "I'm weird." Before the orange-haired youth could continue his interrogation, he heard a groan under the subtle hum of Orium's Soten Kishun. "Rukia." "Ichigo." "Rukia-sama." Seeing her work was done, Orium removed her Shun Rika from Rukia's body and returned them to her hair clips. Rukia sat up and gently placed a hand to where the hole once was. "Thank you, Orium," Rukia said. "Your healing powers have really improved." "Oh, that's not true," the other girl stammered modestly. "Welcome back to the world of the living, Rukia-chan," Jin said. Rukia froze. "Thank you, Ichimaru Teiko," she replied warily. "See what I mean?" Ichigo said. "She's scared of you." "I am not." Rukia protested vehemently. "All he had to do was say hi and you were like a deer in headlights," Ichigo retorted. "I was just surprised that the captain had taken the time to check on my condition." "You're a member of the team he's leading. Of course he should check to make sure you're alright. I bet even Chappie here saw how scared you are of him." "Rukia-sama's not afraid of anyone." "Shut up, who asked you?" "You just did." "Judging by that smirk on your face, I'm betting you're definitely feeling better." "I am, thank you for asking," she replied in that all-too-sweet voice of hers. "Just answer the stupid question." "I am not afraid of Ichimaru Teiko." As the two bickered on, Jin leaned over to Orium and asked in a quiet but impish voice, "Ya ain't scared o' me, are ya, Orium-chan?" Actually, I'm not." Jin paused, his eyebrows raised in surprise by the honesty of the answer. "Yeah, you do look kind of creepy," she explained nervously. "But you helped try to save Kukaki-san while in Soul Society, and you're here helping us now, and Rangiku-san married you, so that must mean that you're not as bad as you look." The silver-haired captain considered the human girl for a moment. "Yeah, know what, Orium-chan," he finally said, his smile returning in full force. "Ya can call me Jin." "What?" she started suddenly. "But I couldn't." Just like Rukia-chan, Jin sighed with feigned despondency. "So stuck on formality." "Well, if ya change your mind, Jews know that I don't mind what ya call me. Okay. Jin-san, Orium allowed. That's a bit better, he said. Jin, we should check on Ikeku and Yumichika, see if they need any help, Rangiku said. Alright, we'll let those two have their fun, Jin replied. Kmin, Orium-chan. But, Kurosaki-kun is still hurt, Orium protested. He'll be fine, the fox assured her. Besides, he's a bit busy at the moment. Let the lovers have their little quarrel. As he picked up Orium to check on the other Shinigami, Jin did not understand why his wife was shooting him a glare for that last comment. After all, surely she knew by now that there were other, far worse remarks he could have made. Who said he didn't know restraint? Orium nervously knocked on the apartment door. Jin and Rangiku were still in their Shinigami forms on either side of her, and despite them stating that they could feel their comrades inside, the human girl was skeptical. How could Shinigami ask to stay in a strange apartment? This wasn't Sato's place, she knew that, nor was it Ishida's home. Yes, who is Inu-san? Asano-kun. Orium blinked in surprise at the familiar face of Asano Kigo. What are you doing here? The other student asked excitedly. Would you perhaps happen to have a shaved man and his beautiful friend in your room? Orium asked hesitantly. Finally someone gets it right. Ikeku-san. Orium gasped, and rushed past the brown-haired student to where she had heard his voice. Hello, Orium-chan, Yumichika greeted her as she dashed into the room. Hey, Ikeku grunted with less enthusiasm. Understandable, considering the layer of bruises and burns which seemed to cover his skin. And who are you? An unfamiliar brunette narrowed her eyes suspiciously at the new girl. Nei-san, this Inu Orium, a friend from school, Kigo nervously interjected. Inu-san, this is my sister Mizuho. Pleased to meet you. Orium chirped and bowed. What is your relationship with Ikeku? Mizuho demanded in a low voice. He's a friend, the other girl answered nervously. Kigo's glaring sister did not seem convinced. Don't worry, Yumichika put in smoothly. Orium-chan's heart does not go out to anyone in this room. Unfortunately, Kigo muttered despondently under his breath. Great. Mizuho suddenly grinned and hugged Orium, who yelped at the sudden change of mood and contact. Then make yourself at home. Thank you. Orium stuttered. Orium-chan, who are these two? Kigo asked curiously. Oh, I met Ikeku-san and Yumichika-san over the summer, she explained. Actually, I was talking about them, the boy gestured to the two Ichimaras who had thus far observed the drama in silence. Oh, sorry, this is Ichimaru Jin and Rangiku. Orium introduced, and then blinked. You can see them. See who? Mizuho asked. Those two over there, Kigo pointed at Jin and Rangiku, still in their Shinigami forms. You idiot, there isn't anyone standing there, his sister scolded. Well, this is awkward, Jin commented. Orium-chan, Jews heal their injuries and leave. Don't bother, not with the ordinary humans here, Yumichika said to the kind-hearted girl quietly. Ikeku-san is hurt. Orium protested. We'll come find you tomorrow, and you can heal me then, Ikeku assured her. I can hold out that long. Are you sure? She asked in concern. Both warriors nodded. Okay, Orium agreed with some reservation, and then turned to the two Asanos still bickering and said, thank you for taking care of them. No problem. Mizuho broke off with her arguing to give an energetic grin at the orange-haired girl. Rangiku found Jin in a lonelier part of a park, sitting comfortably under a tree. She walked up quietly behind him, careful not to make any sound as she approached him. Guess who? She squealed as she pounced and placed her hands over his eyes. Guess who? She shrieked when someone else suddenly came up behind her and mimicked her action. Rangiku jumped away from the new hands and looked to see what had happened. Jin had left his Jigai leaning against the tree, and had been hiding up in the branches for her to show up. At the moment she had pounced on him, he had struck. She was just about to tell him off for tricking her when he cut off any retort by pressing his lips against hers. The strawberry blonde only had a moment to curse her husband's kissing skills before she sank into bliss. One wonderful makeout session later, Jin pulled away and whispered, "Gotcha." "Shut up," was the only retort she could summon up in her post-kiss haze. So, what ya doing out here? What was she doing? Yes, there had been a reason she had been looking for him, but she couldn't quite remember. I think, Rangiku slowly replied, and then her cognitive abilities gradually returned to her. Have you filed the report about last night yet? Finished it just as I felt ya comin', Jin answered her. Which reminds me. His relatively serious tone sobered her up quick, and she paid attention. We knew that we would need to be trainin' to get stronger for the war with Aizen, he said. Well, last night, I would have needed to use Bankai to kill a Jillian-class Aaron Carr, if we hadn't gotten word that we could fight without our Lemaitre-san, that is. Rangiku nodded in comprehension, but then stiffened as she noticed the look on her husband's face. No one else would have picked up on it, but she knew Jin well enough to know all his tells. Right now, he was about to say something she was not going to like. If those were Jews the foot soldiers, Jin continued, then the stakes have gone up. What are you saying, Jin? Rangiku asked nervously. He turned to face her, a determined and very excited smile on his face. It means, Rangiku-chan, he replied, and she paled. She was one of the few girls Jin did not refer to with the Chan honorific. There had only been one time in their lives when he had called her Rangiku-chan, and those had not been happy times, arguably necessary, but still hard. You're going back to school. Rangiku whimpered. And we're startin' right now, Jin informed her generously as he casually drew Shinso from her scabbard. Well, what else could a woman do in this situation? Just as Shinso was laid bare, Rangiku socked him in the face, pulled her Zanpakuto out of her sheath, and declared growl, Hanko. All this was in the space of 1 second. Before the ash cloud could reach him, Jin had already disappeared in a buzz of shunpo. Rangiku knew that Jin would not necessarily attack from the rear. He could appear to her right or to her left, or even pop up right back in front of her. So she called Hanko back and surrounded herself with the cloud. And she froze when she felt the point of a blade touching the top of her head. You're dead, Jin's voice informed her from his position overhead. Good work on that sucker punch, but ya should have checked above ya, not Jews to your sides. Rangiku expelled a very crude word from her mouth. We'll do that later, he promised cheekily. If ya still got the energy after we're done trainin', that is. Chapter 10, God's Lair. Welcome, Kukaki-san. Urahara greeted in his usual chipper manner while waving his fan. What can I do for you? I need another jikin dispenser, the petite noble explained. My usual, please. You do have one in stock this time, right? Of course. I made sure to have at least one chappie reserved especially for you. Please wait a moment while I go fetch it. She nodded in acknowledgement, and the shopkeeper left to pick out the appropriate merchandise from storage. Rukia had only waited a few seconds before a familiar voice saying, How are ya, Rukia-chan? She quickly turned around to find Ichimaru looming over her. It was times like these that she hated being so short. Ichimaru Teiko, she acknowledged respectfully. What are you doing here? Just taking a walk round, he answered. Thought I'd come by and chat with Urahara-san, and I found ya here. I'm simply purchasing some jikin, Rukia said using the standard cautious polite tone she was accustomed to having whenever she conversed with Ichimaru. Oh, and out of curiosity, he drawled. Ya wouldn't happen to know where Ichigo is, do ya? I don't, she answered. He hasn't returned back home for a few days now. There was something Rukia wanted to ask Ichimaru in return, but she was not sure if she could gather the nerve to do it. Ichimaru Teiko, she continued, finally facing up to it. May I ask you a question? Ya can ask me anything ya want, the fox said easily. Why did you choose to save me in Soul Society, she asked before she lost her courage. Ichimaru cocked his head, as if confused by her question. Whatcha mean by that? Rukia's patience was quickly wearing thin, but she restrained herself. You've never shown any liking towards me, and suddenly you volunteer to risk your life to save mine. Why? Sorry, thought it was obvious, Ichimaru said. Don't ya remember me saying ya were my second favorite woman in Soul Society? But why? Rukia demanded. Now that she had finally asked the question, her momentum was carrying her forward, and she was not going to stop until she got an answer. "'Cause I like ya," Ichimaru stated in a matter-of-fact manner. "You have a funny way of showing it." Rukia replied with more heat than she probably should have. "Ever since I met you, you've taken it upon yourself to harass, terrify, and generally drive me insane." It was hard to lock eyes with someone who kept them closed all the time, but she did her best as she glared up at Ichimaru upon finishing her brief rant, waiting for his reaction. He did not look even remotely offended by her outburst. Just the opposite, in fact, his smile had widened to show more teeth. Rukia was no expert in reading his smiles, but she could have sworn that he looked satisfied by her insolence. She kept up her defiant stare, daring the man to make the first move. She was not disappointed, but in an unexpected way. Ichimaru brought his hand up, and Rukia instinctively stiffened. But the only thing he did was gently place his bony, thin fingers on top of her head. The action made her uncomfortable, but she forced herself to relax. "You're growing up fast," Ichimaru told her, and then took on an infuriatingly patronizing tone, "but there's some things ya ain't ready to hear yet." Rukia growled in frustration, using every bit of self-control she had to prevent herself from strangling him. "Ah, Ichimaru Teiko," Urahara sang as he re-entered the room, Rukia's jikin dispenser in hand. "I didn't hear you come in. How are you doing?" Rukia was almost certain that the humble shopkeeper had been eavesdropping on their conversation. She did not say anything on it, though, because he had come just in time to defuse a situation that potentially could have ended badly for her. "Doing well," Ichimaru answered conversationally, and removed his hand from the top of her head, much to Rukia's relief. "How's business?" Same old," Urahara replied. "The usual lovely ladies and crazy gentlemen are my best customers." Rukia rolled her eyes at the attempted flattery, and held out her hand to accept the merchandise. Urahara offered the soul candy dispenser to her, and she gave a brief bow and a word of parting to Ichimaru before she walked quickly out the door. "Why are you here, Ichimaru Teiko?" Urahara asked after Rukia had exited the building. The captain's tone was suspiciously casual as he said, "Mind tellin' me what happened that night 100 years ago?" The shopkeeper went still as a rare serious expression crossed over his face. They both knew Ichimaru did not need to specify the exact date. From beneath the shadow of his hat, Urahara looked back at the squinty-eyed man and asked, "Who is making this inquiry?" "Me," his smirking customer answered. "Though Yamaji is very interested in hearing your side o' the story, now that certain facts have come to light." "Is he now?" Ichimaru nodded. "He wants ya to reconfirm the story ya told 100 years ago, that it was Aizen who framed ya for the hollowification of those captains and lieutenants." "He did." Urahara's tone was flat, indicating he was neither impressed nor mollified by this roundabout admission of guilt on Soul Society's part. "That's all he wants to know for now. But what I wanna know is this, how's Lisa getting along these days?" Urahara blinked in mild surprise. Of all the questions he had expected, that had been rather low on the list. "She's fine," he answered cautiously. "She's healthy and sane, and doing well." "Good," Ichimaru answered. "I don't suppose there's a chance of meetin' up with her, for ol' time's sake." "That is not up to me," Urahara informed him. "Then pass along the message," the captain countered. The shaggy scientist sighed, and nodded. "Very well. I'll tell her that, the next time I run into her." Ichimaru nodded once in thanks before taking his leave without another word. "This looks like a good place," Jin decided as he led his wife, Ikeku, and Yumi Chika to a secluded spot in a park. "K, everyone, out o' your gaius. Why do we have to do Jinzen?" Ranjika whined. "Especially when we know that some of our Zanpakuto spirits are going to be uncooperative." Yumi Chika agreed. "If ya want, we can have a sparrin' match instead, the trio, ya against me." His three teammates immediately sat cross-legged on the ground. While Ikeku and Yumi Chika were as battle-hungry as the best of the 11th, Ichimaru's training methods were creative and challenging, to be put politely. Put bluntly, it was the worst experience they had ever gone through, short of spending a day babysitting a sugar-high Yachiro. The past month under his tutelage had proven taxing even by their standards. The reason they did not take enjoyment out of fighting the fox was because he did not behave like a warrior should. He used sneak attacks, he kicked them while they were down, and worst of all, in the 11th men's minds, he forced his opponents to work as a team. Ichimaru forced Rangiku, Ikeku, and Yumichika to cooperate, and thus breaking their rule of always fighting one-on-one. Inwardly chuckling at the obedience of his subordinates, Jin entered his inner realm, relishing in the familiar sight of the never-ending grassland. For some reason he had never figured out other than just because, he always appeared in his mind without footwear, allowing him to feel the soft grass every time he came to visit Shinso. He looked up at the dark sky, it was always night in his inner world, and it was always cloudless. From his days in the Rokanga, Jin had preferred the night to the day. It allowed him to hide from nasty people, and gave him the opportunity to strike back without being seen. Even though he no longer needed to hide, some things stuck with him. His preference for the shadows was one of them, made evident by his inner world. Despite the darkness of the realm, he never had a problem seeing. Jin waited where he first appeared, knowing that Shinso was never in a hurry to greet him. He didn't mind, they were both very patient people. As he waited, he looked up into the blackened sky, and saw how the stars were arranged. Here in his inner realm they were never displayed the same way twice in a row. This time around, it looked like the stars were arranged so they mimicked the major constellations of the humans, but there were definite differences. For example, Orion wasn't visible this time of year in the real world, but in Shinso's realm, it stood proudly above him. The stellar setup was not the only difference between reality and his mind. Unlike the real moon, which followed a set pattern of phases, here the appearance of Earth's natural satellite was completely random. Well, not completely random, Jin had long ago figured out that there was a correlation between the phase of the moon and Shinso. He had yet to fully decipher the code, but there were a couple of hints he had picked up on. For one, he knew that there was no correlation between the phases and Shinso's mood, she could be pleased, and the moon would be dark or bright. Rather, Jin suspected that it was a way of measuring secrecy. Whether it was how secretive his Zanpakuto was feeling towards him, or how mysterious they both felt towards other people, he was not sure. The moon was seldom full, but it was also rarely completely dark. More often, it was in the occluded phases, possibly reflecting his old habit of hiding in the shadows. This time around, the moon was in its waning crescent phase. "What do you think?" a feminine voice spoke softly from right behind him. "Very pretty," Jin replied approvingly as he turned to face his Zanpakuto. Shinso's stealthy arrivals stopped startling him after he had learned her name. "Yeah, got here quick." If there could be one way to describe Shinso's physical appearance, it would be beautiful as a cobra. Her features were smooth and elegant, and unmarred by her complete lack of hair on her person. Her skin was a fair tone, and her face was narrow, with a subtle, scheming smile on her lips. While she kept her eyes semi-closed, the sanguine shade of her irises were still visible. She wore around her body a white cloak that had two openings for her skinny arms, which she kept loosely by her sides. From the waist down, she had the body of the snake, the reptilian half seemed to go on for about 7 meters, and the scales were the color of polished steel. Here in the shadows of the evening, her scales were a dull gray. This eccentric beauty did nothing to conceal her predatory pose. Shinso was always ready to strike, always ready to take down her next prey. Jin learned early on to not show weakness to her whenever he visited, hunters always sought an opening, and this Naga was no exception. "I was in the mood," she replied. "I know that you came here to discuss something quite important." "That's right," Jin confirmed. "I think it's about time we had a chat about what our Bankai can do." "Is that so?" Shinso replied. "Kamishinai no Yari's base traits are pretty impressive," he continued. "We can hit any target within a few kilometers of us, and only the fastest could react to our attack. But I got the feeling that there's something more." She did not respond. "So," Jin finished, "what secrets do ya have left to tell me?" He knew that Shinso would take her sweet time in answering, but he could be patient. "Why should I tell you?" "Well, that was quick. Any reason why ya shouldn't?" "You have yet to earn it." This time, Jin decided to be the one to make her wait as he carefully considered his next words. "Explain." Correction, his next word, as in singular. "Consider the name of our Bankai, Kamishinai no Yari. The God's Lair Spear," Shinso began to lecture. In the natural order of things, the beings of the divine can strike down hapless mortals without fear of repercussion. But not us. If we are crossed, the reach of our fang and the speed of our strike can pierce even the throne of the heavens, and render unto the immortals the taste of death. We can turn the tables, and make the heavenly fear of a quick end just as mortals fear an unexpected demise at the hands of an angry god. But piercing a god and killing it are two very different things, she continued. So meditate on this question: how can we make a blade kill our enemy in one strike, even if we merely scratch his arm? Poison, Jin answered immediately. Shinso looked at him carefully, her smug smirk frozen for a moment. Then, it grew just so slightly into a one of pleased satisfaction. Correct, she conceded. But knowing the answer is not enough for me. How can I convince ya? Jin asked. Prove to me that you can make our fang pierce the skin of those who call themselves gods, she answered promptly. Show me that we can make the divine bleed, and I will tell you how to use our venom to slay them from the inside. Well, if I come across any gods, I'll take ya up on that challenge. Good, Shinso smirked lightly, and then suggested, I would advise that you leave soon. Rangiku and Hanko are at it again. Yeah, probably a good idea, Jin agreed, and exited his Zanpakuto's realm. Rangiku fled her inner world seething. If there had been a door, she would have slammed it behind her. That selfish, lazy, moody, vain. Hanko Bane uncooperative again. She glared at her husband's smug expression. I'll take that as a yes, he noted cheekily. If she wasn't so stubborn, we would have Bankai by now. Rangiku ranted. I've got enough riots for materialization, so what is her problem? Ya mean she hasn't told ya? Jin asked, his smile on its mildly confused setting. Of course not, she snapped. There was a moment of pause as Jin regarded her with a controlled expression even she had difficulty discerning. What? Rangiku asked irritably. Mind tellin' me what exactly went on with Hanko? He asked. I went into Jinzan, I told Hanko to tell me how to get Bankai, she insulted me, and things went downhill from there, she recounted. Jin seemed to ponder her brief story for a few moments. Then he sighed and said, I've been thinkin', for a while now, about why you're having so much trouble with your Zanpakuto these past few years. I didn't wanna say nothin' before, cause I thought it'd be best if ya figured it out for yourself. Rangiku frowned, but nodded for him to go on. First o' all, remember the basics, he started. Zanpakuto are the extensions of our soul. So whatever problems Hanko has with ya, they're problems ya have with yourself. If ya want Bankai, then ya need to be honest with yourself when talkin' with your Zanpakuto. But I have, Rangiku protested. Normally, I'd agree with ya, Jin replied. But obviously, there's an issue goin' on that ya need to resolve. I'm not the one with the problem, she contested hotly. She's the one who refuses dash. Rangiku. The heat of her argument went dead at his single word of admonishment. That was because as he spoke, Jin was frowning at her. And to be quite frank, the sight was rather creepy. There was no annoyance or anger tainting that frown, but rather something worse, disappointment. You will go into your inner world, and you will talk with Hanko until you have straightened things out between the two. Oh yeah, Captain Ichimaru Jin ordered her. He did not exercise his rank like this often, but when he did, people obeyed, even her. Throughout most of their marriage and friendship before that, Rangiku had acted as Jin's conscience, preventing him from going too far into the dark areas of morality. Her unique position as best friend, then girlfriend, and finally wife allowed her to question his command and even outright disobey his orders when she deemed him in the wrong. She tried not to exercise this right too often to prevent a breakdown in the chain of command, and fortunately, occasions which required her to intercede occurred less and less often as time went on. But on some occasions, Jin would take it upon himself to give a direct order to her when he felt it was required. Unlike her influence on him, which was based on moral grounds and emotional connectivity with others, Jin intervened when she was being foolish or about to act on some particularly stupid and brash plan. He was the only person who had both the authority to give her an order, and was able to prevent her stupidity from occurring in the first place by mere basis of the fact that he knew her so well. Rangiku was about to give a reluctant acknowledgement of his command when the attention of the four Shinigami was diverted to a Garganta that had just opened in the sky. Aaron Carr. Yumi Chika cried. Already? Looks like they wanted a rematch sooner than we thought, Jin remarked, and Ranjika was comforted by the fact that his smile had returned to his face. They saw one of the newly arrived enemies take off in another direction. Let him go, Jin instructed, his smile thankfully back in its normal position. We got enough trouble right here. His comment was accentuated when the largest of the Aaron Carr dove towards the task force. Jin decided that he would be the one to greet him, and blocked the overhead strike the giant had brought down with Shinso. Ichimaru Jin, the Silver Fox, introduced himself. Manners would not hurt here. Captain of the 3rd Division. Yami, Aaron Carr 10, the large antagonist grinned back. 10, huh? Jin replied. So you're an Espada. Looks like you're in the know, Yami said. Whatever loser you fought must have had a big mouth. So I guess I need to actually try to kill ya, huh? Jin exerted a bit of his Ryutsu, and shoved his large opponent backwards. Even though his Limiter was already released the moment the Aaron Carr appeared, Jin did not feel too bad about going to Shikai in this fight, since he was dealing with an Espada. Shoot to kill, Shinso. The blade snapped out and rushed at Yami, but the brute managed to block the attack. He swatted the extended metal to the side and charged forward with his sword raised high. In the time it took for the Espada to make one very easily sidestepped attack, Shinso had already returned to her initial length. Yami. Jin took a look at the other, apparently higher-ranked Aaron Carr who had spoken. This one resembled the exact opposite of his comrade, so puny and underdeveloped it looked like they should have kept him in the Hogyaku oven a few minutes longer. Let me have a go at the creepy guy, too, he said. I'll release my sword and take them on 4-1, and finish them all off. He gripped the hilt of his sword and began extracting it from its sheath with exaggerated slowness. While Jin knew that this dramatic gesture was a sign of overconfidence, he did not want to give the Espada a chance to release his sword. The faster they could end this fight, the better. The Espada screamed in pain as Jin's extendable fang pierced his hand, forcing him to let go of his sword. You, the effeminate Aaron Carr growled. Jin did not stop in his attack, letting Shinso strike again. This time the Espada managed to dodge the attack, and reached for his sword with his left hand. He learned from his mistake and drew as fast as he could. Strangle, Trapatera. The explosion of Ryutsu forced Jin to cover his eyes with his arm. An instant later, a long tentacle suddenly came out of the smoke behind him. Sensing the attack, Jin swung around and blocked it with his sword. The power behind the blow pushed him back several meters, but he managed to shield himself from harm. That all ya got? The narrow-eyed fighter asked, his smile now more mocking. Nice defense, came the compliment from the smoke cloud. I didn't think you would have actually managed to block that completely. I'm actually a little surprised. You Captain Class Shinigami are tougher than I thought. But, what would you do if I multiplied that attack by 8? The smoke finally cleared completely, and revealed the 8 arms that had grown out of the Espada's back. The other 7 tentacles came about and joined the first. While the sudden assault nearly took Jin by surprise, he quickly recovered. After all, speed was his specialty. With a single step of Shunpo, the captain disappeared just as the tentacles were about to reach him. And good reflexes, too, his octopus-like enemy continued. But can you keep up an 8-on-1 fight? Yes, Jin answered back. Oh, the multi-armed Aaron Carr said skeptically. Aren't you the confident one? Let me guess, you're going to release your Bankai on me. Normally, I hate being predictable, but I'll allow it this time, the Vulpin Shinigami replied, and then crouched slightly over. Shinso held parallel to the ground and pointed at the Espada. Then Jin leisurely declared, Bankai. Argent flames burned off the captain's Ryutsu as it launched to new levels. Kamishinai no Yuri. Most second releases were trumpeted into existence by a large explosion and cloud of smoke. This Bankai's only herald was a bell's hiss, and in the time it took to form a thought, the viper had struck. A white streak impaled the Espada through the gut, leaving its victim staring at the offending blade in shocked horror. Before the enemy could react, Kamishinai no Yari was at mere Wakaizushi length again. That's your Bankai, the Aaron Carr said incredulously as he held a hand to his wound. But it's the same. You're not so different, with ya whipping your arms out like that. I suppose, but even with that little bankai of yours, I can still take you, I do outnumber you, after all. To enforce his boast, the cephalopod Arankar struck out with his extra appendages at the captain. With even more ease than before, Jin flash-stepped the attack. Too slow, he informed the Arankar. Actually, it was just right, the espada replied smugly, and revealed that Ranjika was now wrapped in a tentacle and being used as a shield. His eyebrows rose in surprise as he realized that his adversary had sent only 7 arms at him, and used the 8th to snag her. I couldn't help but notice how lovely this woman was, the sexta said. Judging by the badge, I'd say she's your second in command, isn't she? The 3rd Division captain kept his stance unnaturally still, even his smile remained as it was, though a close look at his face would reveal that this expression was merely his lips turning upward, it was not a smile. That's what I thought, the Arankar chuckled, and brought another one of his tendrils to Ranjiku's face, and several spikes emerged from the end. Now that your pretty little lieutenant is in my hands, there are only 2 ways this battle can end. He held up one finger. You can throw down your sword and let me pummel you to death, but I'll let her go free. He put up another finger. Or, I can kill her now, and then kill you after you fully realize that you could not save your dear subordinate. Jin, please make him stop talking, Ranjika groaned. He's making me sick. Very well, I won't let you listen to my voice anymore, the espada purred mockingly. And the spiked tentacle charged at the captive woman. By punching that lovely body of yours full of holes. Growl, Hanko. A twist of her wrist ordered a cloud of ash to rush upwards in her defense. In the mere second before the sexta's spikes would have pierced Ranjiku's chest, Hanko pushed the tentacle upward. The motion was enough that it was prevented from inflicting a fatal blow, but she did not emerge unscathed. Just as the spikes were ascending, they made contact with Ranjiku's face. At first the scratches were shallow, but during their brief journey, the lacerations deepened and began to bleed profusely from the sudden breaches in the skin. Ranjiku did not scream, but her teeth-clenched groan of pain was audible to all participants in the vicinity, and she reflexively threw her head back in a vain attempt to escape the claws. Oops, missed, Luppy chuckled as the last of the spikes finally broke off contact with Ranjiku. But a second later, he froze in terror as he realized that one of his tentacles suddenly felt much shorter than it did a second ago. A glance down revealed to him that his former captive woman, while still restrained by his now detached arm, was in free fall. The espada whipped out another protrusion to snatch his prisoner back into his clutches, only to meet resistance in the form of the 11th Division's 3rd seat. Ikeku put his entire body strength into pushing the assaulting limb back, while behind him, Yumichika was catching Ranjiku in his arms and carrying her off. As soon as they were in the clear, the shaved warrior broke off his resistance as well, and followed the peacock's trail. They were not running away from a fight, they were just eager to escape the danger zone whose center was Ichimaru Jin. While neither Ikeku nor Yumichika had personally witnessed what Jin would do if his wife was ever harmed, they could take a few guesses. And normally, they would be taking front row seats at the spectacle while eating popcorn, but Ranjiku needed to be taken to Urahara's shop as quickly as possible for healing. There was also the fact that the Serpentine captain might take after Kenpaku's lead and not care who got in his way in a fight, even if it meant hurting his own allies. Yes, it would be best if they all kept their distance. Where do ya think you're going? The 2 11th men turned upward to see the larger espada charging at them from above with his fist raised high. Only to meet the blade of Urahara Kisuke. As you were, gentlemen, the Getabashi said calmly to the 2 warriors. Ikeku and Yumichika nodded, and continued their rush to Urahara's shop. Just before they exited hearing range, the green-clad warrior's words reached their ears as he spoke to Yemi, "So, what shall we do with you?" Jin was sure Ranjika would survive. The wounds were in non-vital regions, and he could feel her Ryotsu signature still emitting a strong pulse. What truly concerned him was the nature of the wound. She would survive, but she would be scarred. Of course, Jin loved his wife, and he wouldn't care if she had the face of Yamamoto, but he knew Ranjiku took pride in her beauty. An injury like this would hurt her self-esteem far more than it would threaten her life. Ranjiku would survive, and Jin would make sure that she would recover, both mentally and physically. But right now, he needed to indulge in his rare thirst for revenge. Speaking of which, he now had the complete and total attention of the wasp-waisted Espada. "You're going to pay for that," the Hollow said in a deadly calm voice, his mutilated tentacle held to accentuate his threat. Jin did not think words were appropriate right now, so he did not bother responding. He would let Kamishina no Yari speak for him. Then, as if imitating his opponent, Jin held up a single finger before his face. "That's one." Luppy glared at the Shinigami who dared to think himself strong enough to go against him. Oh, how he would enjoy breaking the man's body bit by bit. There was the sound of Shunpo being executed, and Ichimaru disappeared from his sight. A moment later, another flash of light signaled that an arm had been severed, this time directly at the base. There was no growing that limb back. Luppy pivoted on his feet to face the captain's new position, and froze in terror. Ichimaru was no longer wearing his trademark creepy friendly smile, it had transformed into something more feral and more bloodthirsty. It was not like the battle-loving grins of Neutra or Grimjo, which reminded him of larger carnivores such as tigers or wolves. This smile was something more cunning, it threatened death in such a way that the victim would not see it coming, like that of a snake or crocodile. The octopus-like Arrancar no longer felt like a solid member of the Espada, more like he was prey in the eyes of a hungry predator. Luppy growled at the thought. He was one of the most powerful beings in existence, an Espada selected by Aizen himself. He would not tremble in front of this weak Shinigami. Floating across from him, the smug bastard now casually held up 2 fingers. Luppy went rigid with fury as it finally dawned on him what that gesture was meant to imply. Die. He threw one of his living weapons towards the captain, spikes extended and fully ready to pierce the man's body. Ichimaru did not even try to dodge. Instead he raised his sword so that it was pointing forward. A second later, Luppy was screaming. This time, Ichimaru did not amputate one of his limbs. Not completely. His strike had cut the Espada's attacking tentacle neatly in 2, with one half trailing to the ground and joining the remains of the other limbs. However, the other half remained attached to his body, now no more than dead weight. Luppy glared back up to Ichimaru, who was still grinning like a madman at his handiwork, 3 fingers now raised mockingly. In part rage, and part panic, Luppy attacked with all of his remaining limbs. A second later, 3 more writhing amputated whips had joined their mates. Ichimaru suddenly appeared a foot in front of Luppy. 5 fingers. Just die already. The Arrancar screamed, and fired a point-blank zero from his mouth, sending his 2 remaining spike-tipped limbs at the man from separate directions. They were too close, there was no way for him to dodge now. The tentacles collided only with each other. The beam passed into the distance without harming anyone. Ichimaru vanished from view, and the beam of light that Luppy was starting to become terrifyingly familiar with severed another appendage. The panicked Espada screamed, enraged, and terrified at his helplessness. Jin chose not to wait for him to attack again. His Bankai sped out and not only severed Luppy's last arm, she also bit into the Espada's torso, removing a chunk of flesh. Luppy spun about in desperation, to find Ichimaru holding up thumb and pointer finger together in the classic symbol of 0. And in that moment, Luppy realized that the captain was not fighting him, he was torturing him. With that revelation, the octopus-like Hollow now had a dilemma on his hands. While he knew that he was just being toyed with, and still being thoroughly beaten, the thought of retreating did not sit well with him. His survival instincts won out, and the Sexta Espada turned tail and ran as fast as he could. But evidently, Ichimaru was not finished with him yet. Just a couple feet in front of him, the captain reappeared. And that bloodthirsty smile still adorned his face. Stay away from me!" Luppy yelled in panic and took several steps backward. "Come any closer, and I'll kill you." As if to chastise the Arrancar for his empty threat, Ichimaru lifted up his Bankai once more, and pointed it straight at his enemy. Luppy gasped, and was about to turn tail again, when the familiar glow of the negation came down and enveloped him. The Espada laughed in relief, and decided right there and then that yellow was his new favorite color. His laughter stopped cold for a moment as he saw right in front of his face was the point of the Shinigami's Bankai. If the negation had come even a nanosecond later, he would have been killed. Luppy started laughing even harder at realizing how close he had come to death. "Better luck next time, Shinigami," he cackled. "But remember my face, because next time we meet, I'll rip your head off." Ichimaru, who had frowned when the negation had prevented his kill, smiled again at the Espada's words. "Come back and play again," he spoke for the first time since the torture session had begun. "I look forward to it." Luppy's laughter stopped cold at that remark, and a shudder ran through his body. Jin watched as the sky returned to its normal blue color, essentially giving the all-clear to the Shinigami task force that the Arrancar team had indeed left the world of the living. Now that the enemy was gone, the captain of the 3rd Division ran off to Urahara's shop to check on his wife's condition. As he made his way to their unofficial base of operations, a memory came to Jin's mind, about a situation not unlike the one he had been in today. "Jin." The lieutenant turned his head to the captain who had called his name. "Yeah, need something, Kiraku Teiko?" he asked. "I want to talk to you about the mission," the larger man said in an unusually serious voice. "What about it?" "We got it done, didn't we?" "Yeah, Rangiku got hurt, but she's gonna be fine. The other team members informed me of what you did to the hollow that hurt Rangiku-chan," Kiraku said, his tone clearly indicating disapproval. "They told me that while it only cost you a minute to come out on top, it took you a half hour for you to finally purify it." Jin's smile did not shift in the slightest. "I'm not going to tell you that what you did was wrong," Kiraku said. "Believe it or not, I do know the rage you feel when someone close to you gets hurt. And I know that it can make you lose control of yourself. But that's the thing, from what I heard, you didn't lose control." His vice captain did not respond with either an affirmative or a denial. "I thought so. You spent a half hour deliberately keeping a hollow alive so you could torture it. Jin, the next time you feel the urge to take revenge, make it quick, and get it over with. I know that it won't appeal to your bloodthirst, but it is the more sensible thing to do. The longer you keep your enemy alive, the greater the chance it could get away. That's why I cut the legs off first." Kiraku was not amused that the smart aleck comment was the first thing the boy had said since the conversation started. Other authority figures might have been enraged by such lack of respect, but the captain knew better. He knew that Jin would not really care about anything he said regarding revenge methods. So he moved on to a more significant problem. "What bothers me more," Kiraku continued, "is how you treated your subordinates when they tried to put the hollow out of its misery before you were finished with it." The smile still stayed on Jin's face, but the older man could tell that the boy knew he was in more dangerous waters now. "While I am eternally grateful that you managed to have enough restraint not to harm them, they are now quite horrified by you," Kiraku continued. "And I know that you don't really care much about what people think of you, but you need to remember that this doesn't affect only you." "What you mean by that?" Jin asked with a curious tilt of his head. "Those officers are going to talk, as people are wont to do," Kiraku started to explain. "And when they do, they are going to talk about the psychotic tendencies of their lieutenant. Details on your violent inclinations will vary, of course, but what they most certainly will include will be the fact that Ichimaru Fukutaiko will slowly torture to death anyone who lays a finger on Matsumoto Rangiku." While Jin did not say anything that time, the look on his face clearly asked, "And the problem with that is what, exactly?" "Now let me ask you this," Kiraku finished. "How do you think Rangiku-chan's friends are going to treat her after they hear these rumors?" Bullseye. Jin's smile dropped, and for the first time, he looked a little ashamed at his previous actions. That was actually more of a reaction than Kiraku had expected, but he couldn't say he was that surprised. While Jin was utterly remorseless when it came to killing and torturing those who hurt Rangiku, he was also conscious of the fact that his girlfriend was far more sociable and mentally stable than he was. And he also knew how much Rangiku loved her friends, and he did not want anything to endanger her happiness. Whether people would avoid her because they feared Jin's wrath, or because they feared she might share his bloodthirsty tendencies, it did not matter, it would hurt Rangiku. "So, now that you understand the consequences of your actions," Kiraku said after he had allowed enough time for his previous question to sink in, "you are hereby ordered to go to those officers you terrified on that mission and apologize to them." Still lacking his smile, Jin gave him a skeptical look. "I mean it," the captain said. "If you want people to follow you, you need to let them know that you are not going to kill them on a whim. If you apologize and let them know in your own special way that you will continue to be the same person they've always known, it will put them more at ease. The lieutenant thought it over for a bit before nodding. And after you're done with that, there's a stack of paperwork that needs to be done. Rumors of Lieutenant Ichimaru's mental instability declined after word got around that he actually apologized to the officers he had terrorized. And they stopped completely after a mysterious someone had managed to put itching powder in the laundry of the 8th Division personnel. That was when the other officers were reassured that Ichimaru-jin was just another normal, crazy person in the Godi 13. Jin realized that his former captain had accurately predicted the day's outcome. He had spent too much time playing with his prey, and so it got away from him. So, now the Sexta Espada was free to go back and recover from his wounds, and continue to be an asset to Aizen's plans. Jin swore to himself that he would keep his captain's lesson in mind, to control his temper and win the fight quickly and efficiently. Check the description for the links to the author.